Hi folks, we are back with another pack review. So as you know, a couple of weeks ago the new expansion As High as Honor was released, and as for the last few packs, joining me today is probably the most important person in the design of that expansion, Stephen Patane. Hello to you.
Hello again. Happy to be back. Always love these chats.
Yeah, so I thought that we would start with, like we did last time, with a little look back at our previous review. So we reviewed Bran the Builder, which I don't know how you feel about it, but I had a look through the cards today in preparation for this review, and I noticed that almost all of the cards I've seen played at some point, and there are not a lot of cards that flopped in this pack at all. I think maybe just the star cards are slightly less popular than the others, but I think this pack actually has been a great success. What do you think?
Yeah. I feel like I've seen the same thing. There's a lot of different themes being supported in the pack that I feel like people are trying out and giving a go. You know, some cards here and there that could still use a bit more support, but all up, I'm really happy with how it turned out. Yeah.
Yeah, so at the end of the previous review, we each chose our favorite cards. I chose Storm's End, and I think everyone knows that I have enjoyed it immensely. I played it in the World Championship and at Stalek in my Bara Summer deck, and I'm playing it in Assault as well. So it's been a great card for me. And your choice...
I don't think I've seen you build a deck without Storm's End yet.
Yeah, since it's come out, I have really enjoyed it. Obviously, we played the 8 Regents event with many Baratheon decks. It didn't fit absolutely everywhere, but yeah, I do enjoy using it. It's been a favorite of mine for sure over the past 8 months. And your favorite, according to that previous review we did, was the Mad King's Command. So I think you are pretty happy with that choice as well.
100%. I still think it's my favorite card of that pack. I know I've utilized that, not as much as you've utilized Storm's End, but I definitely take advantage of that with my Trident deck, Battle of the Trident deck. But just in general, I still love the design and the artwork and everything. So yeah, it's still the same for me.
Yeah, I think it's been a great reset, particularly. So it was supposed to target shadows a little bit, and then it turned out in testing, I remember that actually decks that had a few cards in shadows survived it pretty well with the original wording. But then joining the hand and shadows together has really done a great job against all those control decks that like to get a huge hand advantage, and then you can nullify it with this plot. I think it's usable in many circumstances, and I have enjoyed it being used. I think it's spot on in the way it was. It's ended up after all the changes with it. So we also talked a little bit about the problematic cards. So what we thought from the strongholds at least would be problematic, and I can tell you I've listened to it just a few hours ago to remind myself what we said. So we mentioned Casterly Rock as one of the cards that could cause problems, and the other one was the Great Pyramid. So this one I think we did not get exactly right, because the Great Pyramid I have not seen really been played much over the past 8 months, and certainly nothing problematic about it.
Yeah, I think I agree. Great Pyramid, I saw a lot of play when the pack first came out, and now I've just sort of seen it dwindle quite a bit. I still think it's good, but yeah, I think we were a little bit wrong there. With Casterly Rock, still wrong. No really broken combos there, but we have seen that being utilized quite a bit in Lannister with a lot of bestow decks, so that's good to see at least.
Yes, I think it's almost single-handedly made Lannister Free Companies one of the top decks. So basically they have that one deck that is tier 1 at the moment, even though the faction as a whole is struggling a bit, but that deck is really strong and utilizes the Casterly Rock ability really nicely. So that's been one of the most successful locations, I think, of these strongholds, and of course Storm's End we've seen used successfully. But the two cards that actually were slightly more problematic than the others turned out to be, I think, Castle Black and Pike, because those are the two that got restricted after the pack was released. Not too long, actually. The
Yes.
Greyjoy decks showed up in numbers for the World Championship. Not all of them using Pike, to be fair, but it did find its way onto the restricted list, and then we saw over the summer those Night's Watch decks with Great Ranging and Castle Black, so that needed to be split up as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like Pike in itself, you know, I believe in the Chinese meta, they really utilize that card a lot. So, you know, that's understandable. The Castle Black, I believe that restriction is purely because it's so efficient with great ranging because, you know, Stronghold and Army, you know, playing that with for the Realm to reduce both by, well, whichever one you play by 4, it's just reliable. So having both of those in a deck, you know, they had to. I think they had to split that up, and that's very fair. Castle Black in a whole, I think, is still very strong. Don't know if it's necessarily problematic though, but with great ranging, yeah, it is.
Yeah, so of the others, I think Sunspear also has been played a bit, so I think that was a reasonable success. And the other 3 possibly less so. So we have the Great Pyramid that we've already mentioned has not really seen a lot of play. High Garden has seen some play because Randall Tarley decks were really popular with the 7-cost version that just puts locations into play for free. And then of course you have a 5-cost location here that does have a decent ability, but it's overcosted, and if it comes in for free, it's really strong. So that one deck has played it at least, and I think this one can be supported in the future because currently returning a unique Tyrell character only really works with Orton Merryweather. So any other potential character that works with this will increase the value of High Garden. So I think it's not hopeless at this point. And I think at the bottom possibly is Winterfell Castle because Stark decks really haven't changed that much with the release of this pack. Still the same 2 main decks, the Crossing Rush and Filthy with Renown mostly, and the slightly more aggressive version of Filthy recently with Rickard Karstark also. They don't really have any need for this, so this one I think may be less successful than the others.
I think I agree with you in the competitive sense. I have seen Winterfell Castle decks along with Bran Stark being utilized a little in casual play. And let me put it this way: every time I do see Winterfell Castle down and a few characters, you know, of 6 cost, for example, you know, I groan a little bit because it works really well. But yeah, I don't think it's competitively there yet. But similar to High Garden, you know, I feel like there can very easily be more support here, and that can only grow, really.
And then I'm looking at Zolo the Fat here, so that's slightly unfortunate timing. I remember in the design process this was supposed to counter the city plotline, so we had at the gates grabbing Galtown, and then you play City Festival and City of Spiders, and that was in almost all the decks at some point. And Zoro the Fat was supposed to intercept all the gold when you did that, and then at the gates got banned, and those plotlines basically disappeared. So he got released, and there is no real use for him at the moment. So that's kind of unfortunate.
It's all right. He's waiting. He's waiting for the gates to be unbanned. Yeah. I'm on that fence.
Could happen. Could happen at some point. And okay, so there's one more that I like. King's Landing, so that's not technically a stronghold, but it is a neutral 5-cost location that I've really enjoyed, but for some reason no one else has, so it's in my Bar Summer deck, and then no one else plays it. For some reason, to be honest, I have tried it in Lannister and it didn't work, so maybe Richard said at one point that it only works really in that one deck and it's hopeless in all the others, and maybe he is correct so far at least, but I did like this and still do like this location. So anything else that you have enjoyed from this expansion?
I have noticed that, well, nothing particularly from me, but I have noticed that the Bran the Builder plot has been getting a lot more play than I actually expected. Like even outside of Greyjoy, I knew that Greyjoy would take advantage of it for sure with warships, But I keep on seeing and it makes sense, easy economy fetch, all that sort of stuff. So that's probably one of the cards that I'm a bit impressed with, I guess, with how it's performed. And yeah, everything else similar to what we've said before. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out.
Yeah, I think we expected. So we compared Bran the Builder to building orders during the design process all the time. So for most of the process, I seem to remember it had 4 gold. So the difference was that this could be used twice, but obviously you couldn't get it in that same round because it's a reaction to winning a challenge instead of a search at the beginning of the round. But turns out that this is quite useful. And even all the I've seen the deck lists for the upcoming World Cup, and all the Baratheon Assault from the Shadows decks that I checked, because I'm playing that as well, are using this. So they need their black cells and stuff like that, and it would be really great to get it at the beginning of the round so that you could use it, but still they prefer this plot, which just tells you, I guess, how strong it's been. Alright, so we can move on to the next expansion then. This is the main subject of this video. And Steven,
Yes.
I can tell you, has worked on basically all aspects of that expansion. So he's worked on the design and play testing. He's done stuff for the wording and the rules interactions, the FAQ, the art department, and also the coding for the Iron Throne. So really is the man behind this pack, and I will let you introduce what this pack is about, Steven.
All right, thank you. So yeah, as high as honor, as many have likely already seen, it's a big boost for support in House Arryn, the House Arryn trait more specifically, and supporting their neutral theme. I know that we had some there's a big discussion at the start of this pack to see where it would go, because, and we might get to this later. Some people would have wanted House Arryn to be an actual faction on its own, but this pack decided to focus on supporting their neutral theme, and more specifically how in the Game of Thrones, they are, in essence, quite neutral until the very latest, developments. So we wanted to support a lot of their existing themes and introduce a few others that might affect the state of the game. So things like interrupts or reactions to lords and ladies being killed, which you can see in you will see in Jon Arryn, for example, and neutral location kneeling as a cost, and probably one of the big ones that a lot of people have noticed, rewarding lower initiative. Because we've seen lately in the game a huge development in stuff like the Maiden just supporting getting the highest initiative possible and just dominating in that way. We wanted to introduce some sort of counterplay to actually going a lot lower than that, and we feel like this pack at least starts with introducing that sort of strategy. And I know myself, for example, and a few others are happy to see how it goes and continue supporting that. So this pack sort of starts off with that. Also works a bit with a card reveal, not in the sense of Tyrell card reveal, but more revealing your opponent's information, because that's one thing that I know, especially for anti-shadows, that's one thing that actually does counter that in some way. And so we wanted to introduce some more natural and more specifically more neutral ways to reveal opponents' information in a very fair and fun way. And again, we'll get to all that, those specifics later. So yeah, this pack mostly wanted to focus on those themes, and how we could, for some in faction cards, how we could work with those themes that make sense in that faction, but primarily within the neutral cards. And you'll see that we've got quite a few neutrals in this pack as opposed to in faction cards. And yeah, it's as high as honor. House Arryn gets a lot of support.
Yeah, so 40 cards in the deck, and we have 24 neutral cards and 2 for each faction, so 16 of those all together. And we can go through them. So We both listened to the White Book podcast that also did As High as Honor review. They rated all the cards, so I would recommend that you listen to that. It's quite interesting. And we will obviously talk about the cards in that way a little bit as well, but we will also try to give you some inside information as to how the cards arrived to their final state as well. Some stuff from the design process, and I guess we can start with the neutrals since that's the main part of the pack, and we can start with the 7-cost Littlefinger. So he is the first card that deals with that not really new but mechanic that is very prevalent in this pack of revealing cards. So you can play a little mini game when you win a challenge with him and reveal cards, and if you win, you can basically do a Bastard of Night Song effect, moving a power from an opponent's card to your own, and you get like a power claim with him. So he can give you a decent swing, and he doesn't have a limit, so potentially you can do that in 2 challenges. And I think this one actually, Steven, did go through quite a few changes, and I know that a lot of people really liked this ability, not because of its strength, but because how fun it ended up in actual games that they played.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why Littlefinger, as you just said, we went through quite a few iterations of him is because we both wanted him to be a useful 7-cost card, but also, and I know the White podcast also mentioned this as well, we really had to take into account the As High as Honor event. And so we had to sort of find the balance of this card being worth 7 cost, but also it being fair if it was played with As High as Honor. And so we decided to go with something that was less and really impactful and strong ability, and more something that was just really interesting and fun. And I feel like we hopefully managed to achieve that in a very Littlefingery way, where it's the game within a game almost, of, you know, what am I going to reveal? What are you going to reveal? Let's see how it goes. And yeah, I know I was very happy with how this turned out. I loved playing it, and it seems like others did as well. He trades we changed his stealth to insight as well, as a insight on a neutral card is usually very, very good. So, you know, it's just a little added bonus, whether you play him for 7 cost or whether you pay him for 1 with As High as Honor. I'm happy with how he turned out in the end, though.
Alright, and then we have Anya Wainwood. So this is actually a card that maybe we need to spend a little more time on, because she has a new mechanic, and at this point we can introduce this little FAQ. So on ThronesDB you can now find this FFG style FAQ. So it was edited in this style to add a new entry on contributing strength. So it's entry 2.10, characters contributing their strength, and it talks about this mechanic that lets you contribute strength to a challenge without actually having that character participate. So not sure if we should explain this, or if this FAQ is already pretty much clear on what this does, but basically it says that you can only have a character that is contributing strength in that way contribute strength to one side, and then if there is a conflict, so if the character would contribute strength to the other side, it overrides the previous ability, and so on. So there is an example here at the end of how this may be played in an actual game. It's a little far-fetched because there are very few of these abilities, so it's not like you're going to have multiple triggers of this, but just as an example of how it would work if it did happen, you can read all about that in this FAQ. And what else does it say? So yeah, the important part, if it interacts with any card that says you don't contribute strength, like raiding Longship, for instance, that those negative cards will prevail. So in case that was not clear from the text itself. And actually I did try to, I remember way back, I did try to advise you to move away from this mechanic because it didn't really seem to serve a purpose, but we stuck with it, and now actually maybe a few were dropped that did have this ability initially, and now there is just 3 cards that do something similar. But it is an interesting card in itself, so Anya can have a character contribute its strength to your side, even an opponent's character, without participating, which means without having the icon and without kneeling. And it is an interesting ability. Previously it was a bit overpowered because she also knelt an opponent's character when doing that and basically locked them out of challenges. But now if you use it on an opponent's character before they declare defenders, and then they declare that character, of course, as if you've read that FAQ, you will know that that overrides it, so it's not that useful for that. But it's an interesting card that has potential to see play, although she does require neutral locations to work with her, which can be a bit tricky.
Yeah. I know the interesting thing with Anya is we actually had this ability in the first version. Like the direction, the general idea of this ability has not changed. It sort of, as you mentioned, it initially did kneel that character, but that was a bit too strong in testing. However, I feel like she was a good example of, we had the idea, we had the ability, then we sort of had to pause her and figure out how contributing strength, characters contributing strength would actually work. And then we went back to her and made sure that she made sense around that. But yeah, Anya is one of the. I'm actually quite surprised that she just did not change. I feel like the ability itself is quite interesting, and as you said, we will get to 2 other cards that do a similar thing. And I feel like it's something interesting to add to the game. One thing to add to the note, I think this is mentioned briefly in the FAQ maybe, or on her Thrones DB page, that those characters that are contributing their strength specifically are not participating in the challenge. I know you mentioned it earlier, which can be quite interesting for interactions like Burn, for example. Having a character contribute that strength without them actually joining the challenge is actually quite safe. But then it's also got the downside of you can't trigger reactions to them participating, or keywords, for example, which I know is mentioned in the FAQ, for sure. So yeah, I'm happy with how that ability turned out in the end, and keen to support it in the future if needed.
Yeah, it seems like most of the time actually participating will be stronger. Of course, this can get around the icons and stuff like that, so maybe you can use it a little bit more often than you could have that character participate. But there is some potential, of course, to do weird stuff, like against Grand Melee, for instance. A character that is contributing strength will not be affected by any of that plot stakes, basically. So you can get around some stuff with that, and also with attacking alone. For instance, you attack with Miri Mazdur, and you have a big character contribute strength potentially with her, but she will still be attacking alone, so her ability could still trigger. And of course all the knights as well, for Lady Sansa's Rose and that kind of thing. And Anya herself, of course, is a lady that would immediately enable that. So in some ways it could be better than having a character participate. And then we have Knights of the Whale. So this is a unique army. It's a big army with assault that works with that theme that we are introducing here. So your initiative value being 0, you can get a bigger bonus with its challenges action that adds some strength. And this one, I think, is actually playable even outside of dedicated decks that use House Arryn mechanics, because it is an army for Trident and other effects that need armies, and it is a good body with a good keyword, so I think this one might see play.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree there. I do like this. This targets 3 different themes, realistically. It targets army themes, it targets House Arryn themes, and targets knight themes, purely because, sharing the trait with any of those traits. We actually had an interesting alteration of this card just before its latest revision, which instead of the +4 strength, it was doubling the strength, which I found quite interesting. But it also only targeted House Arryn. I know there was a bit of a discussion about midway through development that from GOT, from the Global Operations team, that these cards needed to help in faction decks rather than being a deck on its own. And so one of the directions we chose with this was, as you can see, sharing the trait with Army, House Arryn, or Knight. So in that way, it could fit those sort of decks rather than only fitting House Arryn and doing something really well there. But in general, yeah, I think I agree with you. This is a card that can definitely see play. It's is very specific to a defending theme. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a Night's Watch card though, because Army, House Arryn, Knight, not usually a big thing that Night's Watch have. They do have some armies, but not a lot for defending. I'm keen to see how this one's brought into the game, honestly.
Yeah, it's possible to play it in Night's Watch. They are one of the factions that uses the For the Realm plot that works with strongholds and armies, so having an additional body for that to be reduced, not a bad idea. And I think it's self-sufficient, because worst case, realistic case, even if you have other characters, you can just trigger it on itself, because it always will share traits with itself, so it can get you plus strength and then turns into an 8 strength body. Yeah, interesting about the doubling strength. So for instance, if you had something really big, like a 7 strength character, then you would get 14, but also if you had a character with 1 strength and you doubled it, you would get 2 strength from that, so it would actually be lower than the other resolution potential that just gives you straight plus 2 strength if you don't have initiative value 0. So that's interesting that you could basically get a weaker version on the characters that have a low initial strength. I think this could be slightly more consistent, but then you're not getting those really huge numbers that you could get previously.
Yeah, the only thing as a result of the result of this card that I'm slightly unhappy with, but it's not a major deal, is I think the text could have been slimmed down. Like the ability could have been tweaked slightly. I do feel like it is a lot of text, but the ability in itself, I'm personally very happy with. I think it fits what that army is sort of doing. What's the point of Knights of the Vale? So yeah.
Alright, then we have Elaine Stone. So she is pretty simple. Basically only has a passive ability. She says while she's kneeling, players cannot trigger abilities on in-faction lords and ladies during the challenges phase. So there is a bit of that support for going neutral instead of in-faction in this pack. And she blocks some strong abilities potentially, but she was changed during the process. So she did initially say, I think, while she was standing, she blocked things, and now she says while she is kneeling. Not entirely clear which version is stronger, but it is different in any case.
Yeah, I know that during testing, like, she was pretty much the exact same as you just said, only change being that she's standing. It was one of the scenarios where a lot of people were feeling she was a little bit too strong, just for how much she was blocking, but she is also a 5-cost character. And so the subtle change to switch her to kneeling, not only did it gives the opponent a little bit of counterplay, a little bit of leeway to do something, before anything actually happens. But it also, we noticed there's a very subtle mechanic here. With the lower initiative theme and cards like Knights of the Vale, for example, the opponent usually, unless if they really want to go first, they're usually going to make you the first player. When you have Elaine Stone on the field, making that player the first player isn't usually the best thing in the world, because they can easily just do an intrigue challenge to you straight away, and Elaine Stone is now kneeling, shutting off your entire Lords and Ladies package. So it was a little subtle bit of counterplay there, where the downside of the lower initiative being you have no control over whether you go first or second, actually affects your opponent's decision is now affected because they see Elaine Stone on the field, and when she's knelt, hopefully part of the mechanics is going to be shut down. So that was a very minor reason for that change, but also to lower her reliability just a little bit.
Yeah, and moving on, we have Harry the Heir. So what does he do? Stands neutral locations, of course. So you will see in the locations in this pack that there is a bit of versatility there, or should I say variety, in that some locations want to stand and so that they can be used again, for instance, and some locations want to be kneeling because they have an additional bonus that happens only when they are kneeling. So Harry the Heir interacts a little bit with that, so locations that you have already used, he can stand back, and whether that's worth it, I guess we'll see in the remainder of the pack when we get to the locations. And with the existing ones that were released before as High as Honor, I don't think really there is any interaction that you would specifically want to do with Harry. So Steven, do you think this guy is good?
I think this is a very clear example of a card that's going to potentially be good later on. At the moment, I think he's just all right. As you said, we will get to the other locations, and there's very specifically one location that he will definitely work quite well with. But the more, he's going to be good with the more neutral locations that are released, especially ones that'll be effective during the challenges phase. He does have that passive with Anya Waynwood, where he's boosting her strength and she is also giving him renown. I don't think that's enough to make him super good at the moment, but he really opens the door for future neutral location design. Obviously, he works with helping that cost, but realistically, you want to try to use him to stand a good effect. And once there's more of those effects available, I just feel like he's going to get better and better, and I look forward to it.
Yeah. So for the rest of time, basically, anytime a neutral location is released that does something in challenges, this guy will gain in strength. So
yeah, I do like one thing about him though, and the fact that he looks like Harry Styles with the artwork. I feel, which is quite appropriate with the name as well.
okay, that's got a bit that's wasted on me. I have no idea who that is.
If you look him up, you look at the comparison, you'll probably see it. But yeah.
Okay.
Anyway.
Okay, then we have Lord Protector's Retainer. So this is a non-unique character that has also gone through some variations in the design process. He protects lords and ladies against effects that would target them as the only character. So this is difficult to evaluate. I don't think there are that many, so people usually tend to overrate abilities like this, but over the course of the game there aren't that many abilities that specifically target a single lord or lady character. But if they do, of course, it's a straight cancel. A bit expensive to use him repeatedly for something that would, for instance, try to target lords and ladies every round. But the plus side, I think, for this guy is that even if he goes unused, it's not a huge deal. He is a Bicon with decent strength, so you can still use him fairly effectively in the normal course of the game, I think.
Yeah, I feel like he's going to be useful in a deck where you just want to make sure your lords and ladies are protected. I think importantly, and I know, again, the White Book podcast do mention this, I think, it does prevent keywords as well. So intimidate, stealth, I think that's actually it though, but those are two very important keywords. Lord Protector's Retainer can actually cancel that, which is quite useful in my mind for protecting those lords and ladies.
Okay, so here's the question. If I have, for instance, 3 attacking characters with stealth, and I choose 3 different characters, one of them being a lord or a lady, is that character the only target of an ability?
I'm not too certain, to be honest, but I feel like that would be the case because it's a single instance of stealth, right? One attacking character with stealth is targeting a single character without stealth. But I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
So I double checked this after the recording to make sure we got it right, and Steven was absolutely correct. There were some previous rulings on Marya Seward and Wolves of the North that established stealth targets being chosen independently from one another, so Lord Protector's Retainer will protect your lords and ladies if they are bypassed along with other characters, except in the case of Esgred, because she is a single character that targets more than one, so they won't protect against her.
There you go. Very, very niche scenario, but yeah, I like your train of thought.
But it always works, of course, against Intimidate, because you can only intimidate one character.
Definitely. Yep.
Okay, and then we have Nestoroy's very simple ability. So when he wins a challenge, you can kneel a neutral location, and he gains either Intimidate or Renown until the end of the challenge, which has a kind of a Brotherhood without banners vibe to it. You can choose whatever is the most appropriate in the moment, and gives you some board control, gives you some more, I guess, power gain if you need that, and I think this guy is pretty decent.
Yeah. I think for a 4 cost 3 strength Bicon, he fits the Arryn theme quite well. When we were designing him, we wanted him to sort of be a similar mindset or a similar idea to Bronzion Royce. And so the reaction itself, we wanted to make sure was at least, the cost for the reaction was the same. And the reward, being intimidated around, it is quite flexible. Intimidate is a pretty important keyword here, and when you combine that with the contribute strength mechanics that we have in this pack, you have Nestor Royce on his own, add someone with a lot of strength into the challenge, and that's a pretty good intimidate. Or Renown goes both ways. He's quite flexible. I'm really happy with how he turned out. And I don't think he changed quite a lot. I think we had an old ability with him which wasn't so great, and then we came up with this one, and it seemed to stick quite well.
Yes, and important to note, as we will see later, so there are some locations that want to be knelt, as I said, and they don't actually have that kneeling part in their own ability, so you need to kneel them in some other way, and this is one of the best ways, I would say, because you can pay a cost and still get the benefit if you use it on some particular locations.
Yeah, I do know that the previous version of him, it did have something along the lines of we had a mechanic of House Arryn working with the bottom of your deck a little bit early on in the pack, but when we were revising a few things and trying to slim down the amount of things that House Arryn were actually doing, because they were doing quite a bit to start off, we decided to just simplify him into this, and I am quite happy that we did simplify it. I'm usually a big advocate of simpler abilities rather than complicated ones. It's probably part of the reason why I'm not too happy with how the text of Knights of the Vale turned out, just because it's a lot of text. So I am happy with how he turned out in the end, just for his simplicity as well.
Yes, and we have Maester Coleman, another card that has quite a short text. In the end, was simplified from his original version that also took control of an attachment in the dominant space. Yes. So he simply now can switch an attachment, condition, or item so that it works with Sweet Sleep. We know it should have been a condition, but it's not. You can move it to another character. So basically the one scenario that everyone immediately thinks about, you can move a milk from your own character that your opponent has milked to one of theirs, and you don't take control of the attachment, but doesn't really matter because it works just the same. And I've enjoyed this guy, so I've tested him a bit in Conclave, Baratheon, where he did some work. Actually, that was the previous version that allowed you to kneel any Maester to do this, so needed a few more Maesters in that deck just to take full advantage of his ability. And also in Greyjoy, I had a Greyjoy deck that played Aloof and Apart, so that was a very popular deck a year or so ago, but then Luf was put in a pod with Risen from the sea, and everyone switched away from it. And I thought maybe I dropped the Reasons and I just play this guy as an extra Maester that is unique and can play Outwit to cancel those Dohaeris plays or Morghulis, keep my characters alive. So I've enjoyed this guy in testing, and I don't mind how he was simplified. And I think even though it's a strong ability, people often go overrate abilities a bit that trigger in dominance, because it is a phase that comes quite late in a round. So if you really need to get rid of an annoying milk, you have to wait quite a bit, and some of the damage may already be done by that point. You know, cards like Pyromancers that people were also going crazy about when they were released. Not worth it to wait until dominance. And even Varys, who has an amazing ability, is almost always cheated into play these days. Rare to see him just marshaled in the marshalling phase, because stuff can happen until you really need to use him.
Yeah, Maester Coleman, as you said, the idea and direction for him has not changed. It was all about attachment control, or more specifically condition. I think we added item later on.
Yeah,
control.
it used to name Sweet Sleep by title. Actually, it was a really awkward text. So just changed into item.
So, and I mean, I'm happy with it, how it did turn out. I know I was one of the people that was generally cautious and a little bit worried with having an ability that turns such a big downside, a negative into a positive for you, like, you know, if one of your characters was milked, for example. But as long as that's got some sort of counterplay around it, in this scenario here, it being a dominance action, you know, you have ways he has to survive the challenges phase, right? That is the core downside and challenge of Maester Coleman. But if you do survive that, he is a lot of protection. It is better, in my mind, better than something like Maester Crescent, in the way that not only do you get rid of the attachment, you also use it against your opponent. And he also has the subtle use of actually moving around your own attachments, which, you know, I feel like was a little bit underrated. Having your own milks on a character, your opponent brings out a more important character. Maester Coleman just moves it to that more important character, nice and easy. But again, as long as he can survive that challenges phase, we intentionally wanted to make sure that was some form of counterplay with him. Because, you know, if he was just moving attachments around willy-nilly on his own terms, then I feel like that would be a lot more problematic than before. But I am happy with how he was simplified, and keen to see him played, honestly.
Yeah, when you say survive, of course, that means he needs to survive and be standing, because he kneels for his ability. No limit, so if you stand him and there's lots of conditions and items, you can technically move more than one in a single dominance phase, but that's a bit far-fetched. But if there is nothing, of course, he just does challenges, and again, not too bad.
Yep.
Oh, and then we have one of the cards that has annoyed me recently, Mord. So this one will see play and does see play, and he's annoying. So he basically does a Milk of the Poppy when he triggers, and he has a kind of a Yoren text, so it lasts until he stands or leaves play. Or better comparison would be, I guess, Recruiter for the Watch has the same duration. And this guy is tough to play around, because if you are relying on Nightmares, he has so many phases to just trigger. You can just do it in the plot phase, and it lasts an entire round, or until the standing phase anyway. And he has been annoying. So he's kind of like Milk. You need to, of course, pay more for him, and he is a character that can be removed in different ways. But you can choose a different character each round, and if you have no removal for him, he can pretty much ruin the game for you.
Yeah. He was designed. Mord did go through a few different implementations, as you would hopefully remember. I know that initially we had Mord work with a jail token, where he was moving around this token to blank people's, do a similar effect as to what he's doing now. But one of the key things that we want to keep with Mord was Mord is a very simple person, right? So we didn't want him doing something complex. We wanted him to do something very straightforward, very easy to understand to fit the character. There was a few discussions where he like had a mountain of text, and I know I sort of just said, no, we're not doing that. That's too complicated. And we did actually have a version that was just like this. That was also, we dabbled with blanking cards in shadows, which was an interesting ruling discussion where blanking. You might be able to help me here. But blanking a face down card in shadows would actually remove. It would block that card from being able to leave shadows. Was that right?
Yeah, if it lost the shadow keyword, of course, you could never pay the shadow cost.
Yeah, and or more specifically, yeah, I think we said we had it treat its text, like choose a card in play or in shadows and treat its text box as if it was blank and have it lose all keywords. So it's like if the card also gained shadows from something, it would lose that as well. But similar to Mr. Coleman, we just simplified his scope into just being a flexible milk. We lowered the cost as well. And although I do wish to see some more abilities that prevent cards from leaving shadows like that, and synergize with the next card that we will see in that way. I am still happy with how he turned out. I do agree that he can be a bit annoying, but it is also a good reward for people trying out lower initiative, which we know there aren't a lot of cards in this pack that actually encourage that. So I'm glad that Maud is at least doing that at the very least to start off.
Yes, I agree. I also like the way he's turned out. So the one version you talked about was really crazy on text and it was a bit awkward. Didn't really read too nicely. And then there was a higher cost version of basically this similar ability that seemed pretty much unusable. Couldn't really justify paying the cost of a fairly costly character and then kneeling him outside of doing a challenge. And I honestly thought that this wouldn't be that impactful either, but having played against him, he has annoyed me. So I can say that he does kind of work. Has the guard trait. Not sure if there are others in this pack. I think there might be.
There are two other guards. I've checked as a Martell guard player. I have checked.
Yeah, you can see those decks. There is a Martell guard that has a passive text that allows all other guards to stay standing when defending challenges. It's really crazy if you can get a bunch of those guards into play in Martell. Really, it's like a wall. Can't really attack into it. And yeah, they will appreciate these neutral guards, I think, if they can make them work.
Yeah, maybe not Maud as much, but the other two, yes. And I mean, they've also got what is it? Gulltown. What's that? Because Gulltown Army.
Gulltown. I want to say Gulltown City Watch, but that sounds wrong.
I think that's actually Gulltown City Watch. City Guard. Gulltown City Guard. They also have the guard trait, so it's interesting how the House Arryn cards also had a little bit of a guard theme within them, which is nice.
Yeah, unfortunately, city plots have gone from the game basically at the moment, so you can't really get this guy into play cheaply anymore. But if they come back, I think those decks that use the guards will be pretty nice. Alright, and then we have Sir Vardis Egan, hopefully that's how you're supposed to pronounce that. So another guard.
Yeah.
That is interesting. Seems like he is a bit risky for what he does. So basically when he loses a challenge and he has a military icon, so let's assume it's a military challenge, doesn't specify in his text, so if you give him another icon you can use him in other challenges. But if you lose a military challenge, you sacrifice him to put an attacking character into shadows, and that's before satisfying claims, so you are losing some board presence with his ability and then have to kill something off as well. So in that sense, looks like he's maybe not going to be helpful to you, but he is a character version of Gaston Grey basically, because he says cannot be saved. So if you attack into him with something that has power, or you really can't afford to lose from the board. He is quite a deterrent, I guess, in specific circumstances.
Yeah. So Vardas, with his design, I'm pretty sure he changed a little bit from what we first started with. But I know that this latest design, we wanted to complement. It actually subtly complements what Shadow's Tyrion is doing in a way, which sort of makes like Vardas Egan, and you can even see he's fighting Bronn there. He's the one that Bronn actually defeats to allow Tyrion to leave the Vale. Having that sort of like, it's similar to Tyrion's ability, but worked against your opponent in a way to send someone hopefully expensive to Shadows. I'm pretty glad with how that turned out. I do also understand that it doesn't seem like that much of a downside, and that's very fair. But I do also believe that there is intention to work with anti-shadows in the future. And I can definitely see, similar to what I mentioned with Maud, I can definitely see more abilities coming out that actually lock cards in shadows. And I feel like once we do see more of those cards introduced, Vardas just gets better and better. Because similar to, I know Baratheon have some events, some Relore events that actually do this. Sending cards into shadows can actually be a downside to an opponent. But at the moment, I can understand that the downside is very minimal at the moment. It only really works if they've got a big expensive character with the dupe and power and all that. But as a design, I'm pretty happy with how he turned out.
Yeah, I think he will do some work. Okay, let's move on to Benjicot. So we have a fool character, and fools are pretty popular these days. And he is interesting. So when he stands, presumably in the standing phase, because it's a bit tricky to stand him otherwise, he can draw a card if he shares a trait with it, and that means he works with fools and he works with House Arryn cards. I guess if you can do a deck with a bunch of allies, but I'm not sure that deck currently is really a thing. He can draw a card, and the others he discards, and also revealing is something that matters, I guess, in this pack, because there is also another card that interacts with that. So the one thing that this guy basically has been the same throughout the design process. The wording has changed a little bit, but basically the ability has been the same, and he has no limit, and it's a forced reaction. So if I know I've asked people to try to find some kind of a combo with this, if you can stand him multiple times, even an unlimited number of times, in some weird way he could mill an opponent, force them to draw the entire deck, but then or discard whatever. But of course he works on you as well, so anytime you are losing a card, the opponent is losing a card, you are losing one as well, so you would need to somehow get the cards back into the deck for that to work. But so far it hasn't been a thing, but I know that some people have managed to get him to stand and trigger something like 3 times per round. It's not quite enough, but it's interesting. And if something gets released and isn't considered with Benjicot, I think some kind of unlimited loop maybe at some point could be a danger.
Yeah, I do agree there. He similar to what I said with Castle Rock in the last pack, if a combo is found with him, I can see him being broken. As a design itself, though, yeah, as you said, he pretty much did not change. I'm pretty sure the only adjustment was he had Insight at one point. We got rid of that, and we actually added the ally trait just so he wasn't just working in Fools and House Arryn. He could interact with, other, allies are very sporadic. There's allies everywhere. It just broadened his scope a little bit. But yeah, I'm happy with how he turned out as well.
Yes, of course, some decks also like to have cards in the discard pile. They interact with their own discard pile, like the Mercenaries, or with the opponent's discard pile. If you play a recruit team in Night's Watch, you could play Benjicot to have character Slender, which is a decent deal for you. Okay, and then we have the most complicated card. So I guess this is the time to say there is this rules FAQ for each card on ThronesDB, except maybe one or two that were too simple to really have anything that we've very carefully put together. You can read all the stuff about the cards here, and this one, in case you've overlooked it, I will invite you to click on Tyrell if you're wondering about some of the interactions, because she has such a long text that explains what happens if she is revealed in certain ways, and if how she interacts with look abilities and stuff like that. So I have not written all of that again because it's already crazy long. So when reading him, you should just read Ala as well. But there is a list of cards that I've gone through that he does something weird with. So it's a long list, as you can see. So it's an interesting ability. I think people. This is another card that people read quickly and think, oh, this is going to be great, but there are some conditions he's not crazy good, because he can only remove cards that have a certain cost compared to the initiative value of their owner. So he's most of the time not going to be removing anything huge. Better with non-characters, usually the low-cost events and stuff like that will almost always be eligible, and there is a limit. So if you do something like exchange of information, he's not just going to remove 8 or 10 cards or something like that from that are revealed. He's just going to get one, and limit once per phase, not per round. So if you do manage to trigger him in more than one phase, of course he can get a few. I know people have tried decks that really want to take advantage of his ability, and maybe some of that works, but I think he's also just generally useful. And one of the interactions that is pretty obvious, of course, is the Lord trait on a 2-cost neutral. So any deck that plays Heir to the Iron Throne will have a pretty easy job sacrificing this guy for one of their probably in-faction big lords.
Yeah. I'm. This is probably one of the cards that I am the most happy with how he turned out. And this was actually a very early iteration. We had a first version of him that it was doing a similar argument with Maud. It was doing something too complex for someone like Sweet Robin. And then we came up with this interrupt, which works with a lot of the effects that we've got here. For example, it'll work with Littlefinger, which I absolutely love, where it won't. It really strangles what your opponent wants to reveal from their hand. So, if they see Sweet Robin, if they're, actually paying attention to the board, at least, they will see, it limits what they can reveal in their hand. Granted, the card that they reveal will still, work with Littlefinger. So if they reveal an attachment and Littlefinger player reveals an attachment, it still doesn't, Littlefinger doesn't gain a power. It doesn't cancel that out. But removing that card from the game is a big decision. So I absolutely love how he works. There's also other cards that we'll get to later on that he works really well with. And yeah, I know I've definitely utilized him in a Martell Lords and Ladies deck just for our Heir to the Iron Throne. So I think he turned out really interesting. And yeah, please do check the FAQ on him if you're unsure, because we put a lot of work into making sure. I know you put in a whole lot of work into finding every little itty bitty interaction that he would have, similar to Ala Tyrell. So check that out if you're not sure. But I think he's a great card in the end.
Yeah, basically I checked all the cards that have revealed in their text, and basically I think this is pretty much all of them. So he does have some weird stuff, because those abilities will still resolve entirely, or in some cases partly, even if he does remove the card. So it can be interesting. I think he is very playable, and it's a good point that people will overlook him. I've done that several times already, so if it happens over and over again, I will eventually get used to it. But just having a search effect that has a couple of potential targets, and then I click on something and oops, interrupt, Sweet Robin removes it, and then I see, oh, I could have chosen something that he couldn't take because of the cost. And
Yeah, I know that you had to go through a lot of cards for the ruling of this. This card, as well as Ala Tyrell, I know I had to with the Iron Throne. We recently pushed an update to actually implement revealing cards properly. so that interrupts like Sweet Robin and Alla would work. And I remember I had to go through about 280 cards. We had to change 280 cards just to account for Sweet Robin and Alla Tyrell. So that was fun. So definitely a very simple ability that does, affects the game a lot more than people think.
Yeah, and there's a bit more of that in the remainder of this pack, and even in the non-neutrals you will see some stuff that works with reveal, so hopefully it's been worth it.
Mhm.
And then we have Winged Knight, another character that is very playable in my opinion. So this one, not sure how much he has changed. I think the cost has changed a little bit. What happens to the Winged Knight itself and what happens to the other character has been worked around a bit, but basically he intercepts a kill effect on a lord or lady, and instead of putting them in the dead pile, he will remove them from the game, thus keeping them alive to be replayed. And it's not a save effect, so kind of like core Davos, which means that he will work against abilities that say cannot be saved, and against burn, for instance. So pretty useful, and references lords and ladies, of course, and he has the knight trait, so immediately you can imagine decks that focus on lords, ladies, and knights. Particularly ladies and knights is a common Tyrell theme, and Baratheon perhaps as well can play a bunch of knights and lords in the same deck. So I think this guy very playable in those decks.
Yes, we wanted to make sure that there was a card that supported as I mentioned early on, the lords and ladies being killed theme, and notably this will work for something like House Arryn, for example. You can still trigger their effect, and she won't technically die. Obviously, the card will be removed from the game, so now you have one less copy of that card. But we wanted to make sure that it was, supporting that theme in a way that can also be used outside of House Arryn. So I'm really, really happy with how this ended up. And yeah, you're right. It has interactions, with knights, lords, and ladies that other decks can admire. I also absolutely love the artwork that we managed to get for this. I know Sebastian, the illustrator, he actually did this one quite last minute for us and of no cost. So that was I'm honestly blown away with how that turned out. So I really appreciate that. This has grown on me. This card, it's one of my favorites now.
Yeah, definitely. I think we had all the 40 arts before this one was done, and it really stood out. The previous one, it was beautiful, but didn't really have the same style as the other ones. So really nice to have this one, and it's actually part of a bigger artwork, I think, because you can see here.
Yep.
There is this black mark here is actually, I think, part of a falcon that is flying overneath this army that is here, I think.
Yeah.
Not sure if that's available anywhere in public to show you.
I'm happy to send it to you if you want to show it in the video.
Yeah, sure, if you can. Or I can,
Yeah.
I can put it on screen in the editing, so I can show everyone.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, it's got two falcons up there. Yeah, you're right.
Okay, guard trait as well, so in case we didn't mention that. So another card that works well with that.
I believe that's the last guard. There's three of them: Maud, Servatus, and Winged Knight. Yeah, so
Yes.
and a non-unique one as well.
Okay, and speaking of nice art, so we have Galtown Merchant here, and he is a 1-cost character and has an interesting ability that works with city plots, so slightly different mechanic than the other city plot interactions. They will always, I think, say if there is a city plot card in your used pile, you can do something useful, but this guy just cares about city plot being revealed at the time. So decks that have most of their plot deck with this trait, not really a thing anymore, I guess. As we said, it may come back at some point, but not at the moment. But still, I think 1-costers are always interesting, because any deck that is looking for that setup, that has, for instance, a healthy number of 7-costers, they're looking for the setup with 7 coster and a 1 coster, so they use their infection reducers. And then I've seen those decks use cards like what's it called, that 1 cost character with an intrigue icon?
The advisor to the crown? The Maester?
Let's see. Yes, exactly, that's the one I was thinking of. Advisor to the crown. So even though it does nothing in that particular deck, that deck might not even play any Maesters, so you're not you're looking to use that ability. They just play it for the setups, and I think the Galtown Merchant also will be useful for that, and has a better ability in some way. If you have at least something with city plots, you can gain gold in any faction. Although, as I said, at the moment, maybe you will not be doing that.
Yeah, I feel like I'm pretty sure this card you checked with me about 5 or 6 times to make sure that we wanted it to be if there was a city plot card revealed rather than in your use pile. And I feel like this turned out right. You are correct that cities need to be good for this to be, properly used. But I think it's a sort of thing that, can definitely happen in the future depending on what the global operations team, what direction they decide to go in. But regardless, it's a card that's gaining a gold rather than reducing the cost of something, which we all know that a lot of the 1 cost reducers mostly do. I feel like that's a little bit better because that 1 gold can also be used elsewhere, like events, or can be held onto outside of the marshalling phase. So something like this that relies on a plot to be revealed, but also gives you a better outcome than just reducing by 1, can't be overlooked. But you are right, even without the city, it is just a good one cost power icon, really.
Yes, and the cheapest possible House Arryn character. So there are some abilities that specifically care for at least 1 House Arryn card. So for instance, if you control a participating House Arryn character, is something that appears on cards, and we'll see the agenda as well has something along these lines. And this guy solves your problems.
And you mentioned the art with this. I think this might be a good opportunity to mention that this, along with a few other artworks in this pack, were actually AI generated. And we were very careful in this pack to make sure that we weren't using AI art outside of when it was necessary, because finding artwork for 40 cards, especially for very specific or very specific non-unique cards like Galtown Merchant or even Benjicot, for example, it was very, very difficult, especially to get permission for that artwork. And so we do have, I think there's 5, maybe 6 AI artworks here and quite a few commissioned artworks. But with the way the Galtown Merchant turned out with that artwork, I'm really, really impressed. So I think there's him, Maud, Benjicot. There's 1 or 2 in factions, I believe, and maybe 1 or 2 of I think the 2 events are also AI generated. So that's one thing. That's one thing that I know that we try to be careful of. I know in the future we don't want to rely on AI art, but I think it will be utilized for cards that we just cannot find over the entirety of development, cannot find the right artwork to fit and get permission for. So I'm still happy with how he turned out, though. It looks beautiful.
Yeah, it looks ridiculously nice, this one. I think it's one of my favorites, and we'll get to the Greyjoy card that I think is also really beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we have, that's it for the characters. Then we have some non-characters as well, locations, and the Eyrie actually is one of the cards I'm slightly worried about. It's a 5-cost stronghold, neutral one, so basically ends that set of strongholds that we had in the previous expansion, since King's Landing wasn't really a stronghold. And this one not really playable in every deck because it does care about House Arryn, or, well, Loyal, I guess, also solves your problems. And went through a lot of changes, and I know it was one of the last cards that was still being worked at, and had some really overpowered previous iterations that were kind of crazy, and then got nerfed a bit. And I think at the moment, looking at it, so it will contribute strength, 2 strength for each participating character if you can meet the conditions. which can mean, for instance, let's imagine a scenario where you have one of those tourney for the king and 6 knights with military icons in play, and you attack, and then if you need it, you get plus 12 for that challenge from this location. But most of the time you have something like 2 participating characters, and this potentially adds 4 strength, and you have paid 5 gold for it. So I can understand why some people think that this might not really be worth it at the moment.
Yeah, the Eerie, as you mentioned, we went through a whole lot of iterations. I know that the one that we went with for quite a while, and those who may have been keeping track of development would have noticed this, was a version that would help you choose, sort of negate the downside of lower initiative, where it was changing. It was, I think it was like a reaction to the challenges phase beginning. You can choose who's first player, similar to I think there's a seize the initiative plot event for Greyjoy, similar to that. However, we were really worried that a card like that would pretty much completely negate the downside that comes with having lower initiative wasn't very healthy for the game. And I think that was a good call in the end, especially in location form. Maybe in event form, it's fine, like seize the initiative. But as a repeatable location, not so much. So we ended up going along the lines of contributing strength, which, again, Annual Mood, and there is one more card that will do a similar thing. I do like how that turned out in the end. One thing to note as well, the passive, I feel like, gets a little bit overlooked in this way. It's immune to everything but plot effects. So that's Assault. It's immune to Assault if you're on 0 initiative, which realistically, if you play this card, you're probably going to be on 0 initiative. All you need is a plot deck of 2 initiative or less, and you're hitting that condition. But it's immune to Assault, it's immune to Nightmares, it's immune to Lay Waste, it's immune to a lot of, I feel like effects that are quite prevalent in the game at the moment. We wanted to make sure it did still have some form of counterplay with plots being able to affect it. But outside of that, I feel like it's a very safe card to play, and with a similar thought behind it as Littlefinger. And when I said Littlefinger, which is you can play it with as high as Honor, and it's not a 5-cost location now; it's a 1-cost location. So there was a lot of balancing that we had to make with this. I am happy personally with how that turned out, but I can also understand how it might take a little bit of trial and error to find the right deck for this. And if it requires more support, then we're happy to give it, really.
Yeah, so at the moment I'm not really seeing the potential in any existing deck, but there is something that it does quite uniquely. Well, for instance, Red Keep and the Baratheon version, and the Haunted Forest also can contribute strength to a challenge. And this is a kind of a separate contribution that is not really tied to any character. So anytime you have those weird interactions like Grand Melee, which I have played a lot, this will get around it and contribute strength. So for instance, if you attack with one character with Grand Melee revealed, let me just show that on screen for you, that character will not contribute strength, but you can use the Eerie and get around that. But I personally have not found room for that card in my deck, because for instance Red Keep just does it so much better at the moment. But it is a pretty unique ability that if you can somehow exploit, it may make it worth it. And also there is the -2 initiative. So at the moment, again, I think just playing your entire plot deck with 0 initiative is not going to get you enough reward. But if you did get some reward for that, you can have other plots that are in range of that 0 initiative. So if you play something with 2, it reduces it down to 0, and you have more plot choices with that. So if that ever becomes a deck that you just play a plot deck with low initiative and get a huge bonus, having more choices with that, I think the agenda does something similar, and the area, of course, can expand that range for you. So at least there is that for the future.
Yeah, and the last thing I'd say about this card, and we will see it, as you just said, with the agenda as well, is it was a good example of a change we had to make later on, which was to ensure that House Arryn wouldn't just naturally work really well with Brotherhood. For example, something like Ghost of Fireheart, where we're finding issues where, House Arryn, by default, being neutral, is non-loyal. So utilizing a lot of that non-loyal tech, at first we thought, oh, this is an interesting interaction, but then it just became, it was very clearly too strong, especially with things like Hollow Hill and Ghost of Fireheart, as I just said. So this sort of encouraging loyal cards to be in the deck, and again, we'll see with the agenda in a more reaffirming way. And actually the next card as well is a good example of us trying to show this is what, like, they're pretty much loyal, and House Arryn we'd like them to work together, and that is what I would like to support in the future. And I'm really interested to see how people take it for now.
Yes, there was quite a clear switch at some point in the process. A lot of those cards were played with if you control no loyal characters mechanics. So, as you said, Hollow Hill for the draw, and Ghost of Highheart, and even the agenda. I know some people were trying just to play Brotherhood instead of the Banner of the Falcon that was also provided, of course, with these cards. And yeah, made complete sense to move away from that, because it didn't really fit the theme that was that we were going for.
It was broken, really.
All right, let's have a look at the other locations. So we have the Vale of Arryn, which is interesting. So it can gain you some power, 1 power if you win by 5, and 2 power if it's kneeling. So it does not kneel to gain power. You need to kneel it in other ways, and we mentioned previously with Nestor Royce, he can kneel it for his cost, and of course it's some cards care about the actual cost. Anya Wainwood cares, so if you use Anya to kneel this, you will have a broader range of targets for her ability. And if it's kneeling, it gains you 2. It's limit once per phase, so compared to the Honey Wine, the Tyrell location, let me show you that. That also gains a power when you win by 5 strength, but it only gains 1, and if you win multiple challenges you can get more, and they go on location. But the Vale of Arryn, you can gain 2 in a single go, and it goes on a character, participating loyal or House Arryn, so you can play it in decks that don't really revolve around House Arryn at all. And the only question I think is the cost appropriate, because it is more expensive than the Honey Wine. So not sure if this is worth it or not.
Yeah, I feel like this is, as you just said there, it definitely is worth it in a deck that actually cares about the cost, like Anya, for example. But I think it's also the fact that this is, in itself, it's a neutral card. So if an in-faction card is cheaper, doing something about the same thing, I think that makes sense, personally. But this very clearly has the mechanics in itself lean towards House Arryn, but it can still obviously work with just loyals. You're not getting the full benefit of it kneeling, unless if there's a different way for you to kneel that card. Yeah, I think this is a good staple to any sort of House Arryn themed deck. Whether it would have to be House Arryn and probably a bit of in-faction cards as well, which was the intention. But this very clearly fits that theme.
All right, and then we have the Bloody Gate. This is a cheaper one, so 1 cost location. Basically, the text is similar to something like Bastard Daughter in Martell. So when you lose a military challenge, you have to have a defending character. So basically, if it's an opposed challenge, not strictly true, but most of the time that will be the case, you can discard the card from an opponent's hand, from the winning opponent's hand. They will choose it, but if the location is already kneeling, again, it does not kneel with this effect, so you will need to kneel it in another way. It's a random discard, and this is fair enough. I think cost 1 and an interesting ability. However, the question is which decks really care for this particular ability.
Yeah,
not sure. I know that when we created our decks for the World Cup, this was in some early versions, but in the end we dropped it because it was not really worth it.
Yeah, this ability here, we had a bit of a. We wanted to support the very subtle theme of persuading against military challenges. We had other cards like an early version of Sweet Robin that was doing something similar, um, but a good example of that would be something like Lysa Arryn, where it's not blocking military challenges, but it's sort of encouraging your opponent to not do military against you. This was a card that we very clearly thought we could support that theme in a more straightforward way than Lysa Arryn does. And of course, I think just on its own, it's a one cost for those abilities like Bronzer Royce, Nestor Royce, Knights of the Vale, all those, as high as honor, the event. Um, Even without the reaction, it's just that one cost location that's very easy to use.
Yeah, and even if you would argue that this should really cost 0 for the effect it has, cost 1 is something that you need for some Arryn abilities. They say need a location with cost 1 or higher, so basically anything with the House Arryn trait will have that cost, I think, for the remainder of time.
Hey, it's cost 0 if used for the realm because it's a stronghold.
Sounds like a plan. If you want to play the Eerie but you miss out on it, and then have this as a backup target. It turns it into a 5 gold plot at least. So.
Yeah.
Okay, then we have House, not House, we have the High Road. So this one is actually very playable, the most playable I think of these locations in just a wide range of decks. It's a limited location that provides 1 gold for 1 cost, so slightly inefficient, but you can get some tempo play with that if you use its ability, sacrifice it to reduce the cost of a non-character. And the interesting thing with this is, so there will be decks obviously that play lots of events that cost 2 or more, and they think they can get the benefit, but also it's an action, not a marshalling action or any other phase specific action. So this single-handedly does allow 2 cost events to be played in weird phases, particularly the plot phase. So the one that we always kind of mention with this in this context is the Night's Watch card, the Tricksy Bird, that is a champ card that needs plot phase gold, and that cannot really be that easily achieved. You need to dedicate your plot deck to gaining that gold, or you need to play more than one tourney grounds which can do that, or you need to use your Old Forest Hunter or something like that. So you need to work for it, but just having High Road can single-handedly allow you to do that, and it is a strong effect. And basically anything that you could potentially use in phases where you are not supposed to have gold. So I think this will be interesting.
Yeah, I definitely see High Road being played. It's very clearly just an alternate version of the King's Road, but it's still a different ability. It's not a copy, which is good. That interaction I am looking forward to. Honestly, I know there's someone in my meta, Alistair, who has been utilizing that quite a bit in his Night's Watch decks, and he's loving it. In fact, I think in our Worlds deck we're actually doing that. So yeah, I'm really happy with how it's turned out. It initially came off the fact that in our initial batch of cards, we actually didn't have any good non-unique locations, so we wanted a non-unique. What better than the High Road? It's the only. I think it's the only major road that we haven't got in the game yet, right?
No
the
clue.
Ocean Road.
No clue on that.
Yeah, I think there's the Ocean Road, the King's Road, the High Road, and there's probably another one that I'm definitely missing. But yeah, that sounds exciting.
And we have some other card types as well here. So Lord Protector of the Vale is the second card that uses, apart from the Eerie, I guess, which is slightly different, the second card that uses this contribute strength mechanic. This is the first card that gives a specific character +2 strength. So if it's Littlefinger, he gets it, but others do not get it. So it's unique in that. Other previous attachments do it slightly differently, but the real interesting part, of course, is the challenges action. So you can have attached character contribute strength to the challenge in that weird way without actually participating. And this actually is quite straightforward. So if you have a big character with big strength, if you're really ambitious, you could play, for instance, the Mountain, who has 10 strength. You will be able to use that that strength in another challenge. So specifically, it says power, but you can add a big chunk of strength to a challenge, and the timing works out okay because you can use it when needed. So there is a bit of versatility there, and I think this one is not too bad. But I do know that we had possibly versions that were even stronger, that were a bit crazy in testing. So this seems a bit fairer. Not sure if you can
Yes.
remember the specifics.
Yeah, yep. So it, I mean, with the versions that went along this line of contributing strength, I know we had a previous one that did some crazy thing, like when you reveal a card, gain a gold or something. It wasn't to be honest, it wasn't very exciting. But this version here, initially we didn't have the power condition, so you could contribute strength to any challenge, which was a little bit too strong. And so we decided what's the most appropriate challenge for it to contribute to. Power challenges, House Arryn do have a little bit. If you were to relate an icon to them, it would probably be power, and yeah, it also fits the title as well. So that was the only real change that we did for this iteration. And yeah, I think notably as well, I don't know if you mentioned this, it does not kneel the character that it's attached to. So it's similar to the Targaryen one, is it Mother of Dragons, I think? One that has the character participating?
Yes, I think so. Yes, during a challenge in which you control a participating dragon, you can kneel the attachment to have the character participate. So specifically Daenerys, since she is the only target.
Yes, it's basically a smaller version of Mother of Dragons, but also neutral and can target more people. So I feel like it balances in that way. This is another one that I was really happy with how it turned out.
Yeah, so again, that tricky comparison, which is stronger. Is it stronger just to have a stand ability and try to have the character participate in the second challenge, or have this? Most of the time, possibly just straight participation will be stronger, but not always. And this is pretty reliable. So if you have a character that has another icon besides power, doesn't even need to have power, I guess, technically, with this particular text. You can use it in both challenges, so that works out all right for you. And then we have a couple of events. We have Lysa's letter. Let me remind myself what this is. Yes, so this one is interesting. This one did have a bit of a change in the design process, because the previous version was even more restricting. But this one, so at the beginning of the challenges phase, you basically choose a challenge type, and the opponent is then forced to do that challenge to get their claim back. Otherwise, their claim is set to 0. And I think the idea is, of course, in control decks, you could manipulate things in a way that the opponent might not be able to do that particular challenge that you name. So their whole challenges phase will be set with that 0 claim and no way to counter it, which is really strong if it was a location ability, for instance. But it is an event, so you can only do it 3 times in normal circumstances, and most games you cannot really expect to draw all of them. So it's a strong effect, but it is on a card type that is not so repeatable as the others.
Yeah, I the direction for this one was to dictate your opponent's the order of challenges for your opponent, right? That's the lowest level of what it does. But then, as you said, once you get into a deck that you can actually control your opponent's board a little bit better, for example, either get rid of characters who have of a certain icon, or icon control, for example, can also utilize this. If you can block out an entire icon, you can shut down a challenges phase. And I think that's fair for an event. If it was something repeatable, then it's problematic. really, really happy with this one. I know I keep saying that, but this one here, I feel like it's allowing certain types of control decks to actually function um, by rewarding, very specific control to shut down an entire phase, which I think is really cool and really interesting. I do also understand that the wording of this is a little bit tricky, where it's until the end of the phase. If they haven't initiated this phase, set it to 0. But I know you were going through it with me a lot as well. We had to get the wording on this one correct.
Yes, so
And
it copies Brothel Madame, which is a previous card that I think possibly the only card in the game that has a kind of a dynamic effect that triggers in this way. So it continuously checks for this condition if you have given the opponent gold, so you can potentially give them gold with something like paid off in the challenges phase, and Brothel Madame will remember, of course, that now you can initiate military challenges. So we needed to do the same here, because if you just set the claim until the end of the phase to 0, then that wouldn't then change when you did the named challenge. So it needed to be dynamic, and I think this was the only way to word it. So when the opponent does initiate that particular challenge, of course they get their claim back.
Yeah, this card is a good example of us trying to balance simple wording and wording that is, bulletproof in ruling. And I think realistically we try our hardest to achieve that. I know me and you work very, very hard to make sure these cards are as bulletproof as possible. But also without them. I know there's some rulings, for example, that we discussed that we go with a simpler explanation with the small chance of someone coming out of the works and saying, oh, but in this very specific scenario, the way this is worded doesn't work. This was an example here where we just want to make sure that it worked no matter what.
Yeah, hopefully there isn't too much of that kind of thing. So hopefully they're pretty solid. Yeah, but we do try to keep, if there is a realistic, simpler option, of course, we try to go with that. And we've changed some of the text itself. Some of the templates were shortened for some effects. The very first pack that the design team did, the Forgotten Heroes, that had the Bestow deck, of course, had a much simpler text. It said that character gains gold, for instance, as opposed to the longer move 1 gold from the treasury to that character, or whatever it was in the FFG era. So it was simplified, and maybe you can find some similar examples of that in the later cards as well. Then we have the CD Strong. This is an interesting event that actually was difficult to trigger in its previous version. I think it required a House Arryn, maybe even a unique House Arryn card, or Stannis Baratheon, I think it said, in play.
Yeah.
Now you just need to lose initiative, and the effect is interesting. Again, it's questionable whether it's worth it, but for instance, some decks where their lords and ladies are really key cards, for instance like a Greyjoy deck that is let's say post reset, when the boards are small and they want to play their Asha, and you play this, they're forced to discard her. Or of course, if they can't, if there is no lord or lady in hand, they have to reveal their hand, and as we've seen, there is some interaction with that in the other cards in this pack. So
their hand and shadows area. So it's a full information reveal, pretty much, if they happen with the ladies. This card, I'm so happy that we're able to get this quote into the game finally. The seed is strong, as loyal book readers will know. That is John Arryn's. Almost, he's muttering that on his deathbed, as you see in the photo. That's what it's meant to depict. It's primarily. I feel like it's reflecting that statement quite well. in a really interesting mechanical way that also interacts with the reveal effects. As you said, it will interact quite well with Sweet Robin, for example. But even outside of that, it's just you now know your opponent's entire hand and Shadow's area. Granted, you won't know the two cards they draw in the following draw phase, but I feel like that's pretty important regardless. It does also happen, and I know we'll get to this in another card, one of the Baratheon cards. It does happen at a very interesting timing as well, when an initiative is determined. That is before the when revealed stage of a plot. I don't know if it really has any interesting interactions here. You may have found something potentially, but I know that that's something at least to note that happens before the plots actually, reveal.
Yeah, there are some examples here in the FAQ. So if you have Sir Rolly Darkfield and you need to discard a card, this could potentially discard your only card or something like that, or the Amber Loyalist. So it could work. Not sure. Let's say a Greyjoy example where they want to play Risen from the Sea when they reveal Morghulis. If you have Sweet Robin, what's the condition there? Let's check. So equal to or lower than its owner's initiative value. Yeah, so that's a zero cost event, and of course can be discarded at any time. So or intercepted by Sweet Robin. So you could get that with the City Strong if they can't discard the Lord or Lady, and if they have to discard their Balon that they were going to play after the reset, for instance, that's still pretty good for you. So in that sense, it could work out. Of course, one thing I don't like, so when you draw this in the draw phase, it's almost the full length of the round until you can realistically play it. So it's it's a card that is not immediately useful, but in the long run. And we know that recently, over the past year or so, especially I would say when we had more interaction with the Chinese players in the international scene, they have really popularized the Iron Throne, the later version that you can name a card and that card cannot be played or put into play. And of course, any kind of hand knowledge with that is really strong.
True.
So
Yeah.
that's a card that is played often, so you could combine it.
Or everyone's favorite R'hllor attachment, Ruby of R'hllor.
Come on now.
Yeah.
Maybe briefly before Selisi got redesigned, there was one in some deck somewhere. Actually, I do like it, but yeah, not really playable. But I do like my Baratheon green side weird decks that go with the hand knowledge and the Acolytes of the Flame that gain some additional knowledge of the cards that are being drawn, and then you use the Nope Throne and Dragonstone Convert to name cards that then cannot be used. It's a bit silly, but honestly, it has a winning. It has a positive win rate for me at the moment, so it's not a complete joke. And yeah, maybe something can be done along those lines.
Yeah, and I guess one last thing to note with hand knowledge is Littlefinger. In that little game that you're playing with him, if you can see your opponent's hand and you see that they have a card type that you have, that they don't have, then you have a very easy reveal for Littlefinger. They say they have no attachments, like you have attachment in your hand, done. You win that challenge, you win that little game. So, we tried to make sure that hand knowledge that you do gain can be utilized in other ways. And there are existing cards that do that, and I hope to support more cards that actually work with knowledge of the game. It's like a game within a game that I think is really interesting to play with.
Yep. Okay, 3 cards remaining. We have 2 plots for you. And starting with the Defiance of Duskendale. So we have Siege Trade here, which is important for Battle of the Trident, although the timing doesn't really work out on this one. So when you kneel a location with Assault, you can discard it from play. Well, or in fact, if anyone kneels a location using Assault, so probably you're not going to use it against yourself in a Joust game if your opponent kneels one of your locations. But in a melee game, if someone has this revealed, of course, they can use it with anyone's Assault. And what do we say about this one? So Assault still pretty rare, but a character like Great Ranging that has been known to participate in more than one challenge with certain stand abilities that Night's Watch has can potentially get at some locations with this plot revealed, so could be annoying for the opponent, I guess.
Yeah, I'm glad that we're introducing cards like this that are trying to make assaults a bit more permanent in some ways, at least temporarily whilst you have that card available to yourself. So in a similar vein to Horn of Winter in the previous pack. This was from a design perspective. This is one that the idea had stayed the same the entire time during its development, but it just got simplified more and more the more that we tested it. I think its initial implementation, it was I think it's each non-stronghold gained the contested trait,
Yeah.
and it's like after a contested location was not by assault or non-character ability discarded from play. It was just so complicated. It made thematical sense, but it's very complicated. So we just eventually settled on something straightforward that I think the more that we see assault, and we will continue to see assault slowly added more and more into the game, the more use this gets. And you're right, any sort of repeatable assault will definitely love this. Love this card. One thing to note with Battle of the Trident that you mentioned there, the timing is a bit awkward, but only for revealing this with Battle of the Trident. If you have this card out first, it does trigger before you would trigger Battle of the Trident, so it's not too bad in that regard, where you have naturally open Divines of Dusk and Dale, assault a card, reaction, kneel that discard it from play with a Dusk and Dale, and then when claim is applied, you flip into a new plot. That still works. But flipping into this with Trident, doesn't work for the challenge you trigger Trident in.
Yes, but it will work for future challenges potentially, kind of like the Red Wedding with Reigns.
Yep.
What else did I want to say about this? Yeah, so one thing, rules interaction here. So most, a good percentage, I guess, of locations can be knelt by their ability. If you can imagine something like Starfall, for instance, that can be triggered in challenges before it actually gets assaulted and is then knelt. So you cannot assault that location. You can target it with assault, but you cannot double kneel it if it's already knelt. So you will not be able to trigger reactions to that. But some locations, of course, do not manage to kneel in time to be saved. You can get something that triggers later in the round, like Hollow Hill or the Iron Throne or something like that. So, or locations that don't kneel at all will always be eligible. And the other plot we have is Wardens of the East. So this has the House Arryn trait, also Siege, and very simple ability, of course, Zero Initiative, which House Arryn wants with some of their other cards in this spec. And an interesting ability that I have not used myself, but I played against it and it's surprisingly annoying. So it stops you playing in-faction events, and most events in most decks, I guess. Well, decks do tend to play a lot of Nightmares and Enhanced Judgment, but a lot of events will be in-faction, and also play with Shadows Revealed. Okay, so that doesn't really get rid of your Shadows cards unless you have Sweet Robin and you manage to take one. But the surprise element, of course, is gone. So this is surprisingly annoying card to play against. The question is it worth it for the player that is playing it to use it?
Yeah, it's a very similar scenario to like Barring the Gates and King in the North. It can if it doesn't affect your deck, then this is a good plot, realistically. With this one here, we wanted a very clear, similar to what I said earlier, a very clear passive counter to Shadows, without directly just targeting Shadows. So this will be useful. We wanted to make sure that the card was useful if you ended up versing a player playing no Shadows cards, because blocking in-faction events is still very useful. Similar, it's along the similar line of No Surprises with the Stark event, where that hits events and Shadows, cards coming out of Shadows. So obviously got interactions with stuff like Sweet Robin, but yeah, I'm really happy with a card that just reveals the cards in shadows. It's a very passive way of countering it. If you see your opponent's tricksy shadow plays, like a Robert Strong in shadows, for example, it really dictates. You know how you're going to play that game. Then you're going to be careful, and it really does spoil a lot of their plans.
Yes, and one more thing with this, so it has the House Arryn trait, and some cards. I guess we can move on to the agenda because that's one of them. Wants a certain number of House Arryn cards. So if the number of them is higher than your initiative value, so let's imagine that your initiative value is 0 because the agenda helps get it down towards 0. And then just revealing that plot will already, regardless of what else you have in play, will already turn that on. And yeah, that could work nicely for you. And I guess you might consider it in Banner of the Falcon decks. So this is our agenda that we have. And yeah, Steven, this one also went through a lot of changes. I guess some of the versions were a bit crazy. This one, not so much. So it gives your character strength. So let's imagine that you meet the condition, you put your 12 House Arryn cards in, your initiative value is 0 because you have low initiative plots and you get -2, so anything with value 2 automatically is 0, and then you just need one House Arryn card in play and all of your loyal characters will get +1 strength. This sounds good in theory, so the question is how realistic it is to have a good number of loyal characters that can really get the benefit of this. And I think this is the I guess with the Lord of the Crossing is the only previous one that in any way deals with strength. So we have econ agendas that do nothing else apart from giving you some gold bonus, and we have some that have more interesting abilities, but nothing really that just gives you strength across the board. So it's pretty unique in that sense.
Yeah, this is an agenda that quite early on we had a very complicated ability, and quite early on we made the decision that, similar to other banner agendas, this needed to stay simple. It needed to be a straightforward card. I mean, granted, I say other banner agendas, unlike Cohort, I more mean banner of the X. This needed to be fairly straightforward. Obviously, it needed to do something more than those other banner of the X agendas, primarily because it's asking for neutral cards that anyone can already include in their deck. And so this, similar to what we said with the Eyrie and Vale of Arryn, it really tries to tie together. It's killing two birds with one stone with ensuring that to utilize it, you have to have those loyal characters, so you can't, take advantage of Brotherhood, for example, but also giving you a reward in that way. And also, I guess the third bird that it's killing is initiative. We had a lot of iterations of this, where I think after that complex iteration, we just went with one that was boosting strength in general. And for a while, we actually had one that was just giving House Arryn characters +1 strength. I think it was if each opponent had a higher initiative value than you, though, it gave you +1 strength. Each House Arryn character, so +1. But later in the pack, we had a discussion, the global operations team, they wanted to make sure that the agenda wasn't just encouraging a House Arryn deck. So less like how the Free Folk encourages a Wildling deck, and they wanted it more to be like an actual Banner of the X deck where you're utilizing the House Arryn cards to complement your in-faction cards. And so we thought this was a quite elegant and simple way to do that, keeping to the agenda being fairly straightforward and fairly simple, which was our first requirement, in just making sure that, those loyal characters, which are very clearly going to have to be in faction, are being boosted by you dedicating yourself to the House Arryn themes, both with the cards and with lower initiative. Obviously, if you have, because of the agenda itself, if all of your plots are two initiative or lower, by default, if you have a single House Arryn card in play, all of your lures are constantly getting +1 strength. And really, there's no way around that because as of currently, there is no way to blank an agenda. So that's a very passive +1 strength that you're just getting for free. I feel like that's a bit underrated. It'll fly a bit under the radar here and there, but imagine that against something like Blood of the Dragon. It's pretty much countering that on its own. But then, in general, outside of that, it's just giving you an extra strength. I feel like it's, and we'll see it with Worlds, hopefully. I feel like it's got a very subtle use that doesn't really get appreciated until you start playing around with it. And we did notice that in playtesting, that it actually worked quite well, but it wasn't doing anything exciting, which, again, was the intention.
Yeah, some players, of course, don't really care whether it's exciting or not. They just look if it's efficient. And I definitely agree with that design decision, basically, to move away from the non-loyal, first of all, synergies, and of course having this one House Arryn deck where you just put all the House Arryn cards into one deck, and then it's all neutrals, and choice of faction is irrelevant. I think that's for a pack that was basically in development for 8 months or something like that, to just basically give you one deck that you can play from it is wouldn't be great really. So we wanted, I think, 8 decks to be played with each faction that would be different from one another in some way, and so far too early to tell, I guess. I think the World Cup has a couple of these Banner of the Falcon decks, including one in the Chinese team, which I'm sure is going to be great because they are basically the defending champions, having won the Battle of the Nations, which was the previous event that was held with this format a couple of years ago. So we'll see if this gets used. I'm personally slightly on the pessimistic side about this, but I've been wrong before about cards like this.
Yeah, and this card might actually be a good opportunity, especially wrapping up all the House Arryn cards that we're looking at here, to probably discuss the general direction of these cards. As many know, there was always the possibility of making House Arryn a faction on its own, and I know a lot of people would like to see that happen. But this discussion went on for quite a while on how to handle House Arryn and supporting them in the future. And realistically, as much as we would want to introduce them as a brand new faction, it would require a lot of catch-up. Because right now, I think if you do a search on just how many cards, in-faction cards there are per faction, it's around I think it's like 120 or so.
Bit more even. I think it's 140.
A bit more, yeah. Yeah, about 140 in-faction cards. So to release this faction on its own, at this point, if we were to release, in this case, I think it's 20 cards or so. How many did we release in this pack?
24. 24 neutrals. Not sure if absolutely everything has the House Arryn trait.
Yeah, almost. Most, I think there's like 2 or 3 that don't. If we were to make those specifically House Arryn affiliated cards, then they're 120 cards behind every other faction. And so by default, we would be either playing years and years of catch-up with constantly having to support a single faction more than everything else, which would get boring after a very small amount of time, or we would have the quite literally impossible task of the team designing 140 House Arryn affiliated cards in one go. If you thought that this pack took a while, that would take at least like 4 years of development, probably. So it was a tough decision, and I'll be honest, if this was something that was happening, early on in the game's lifetime, obviously that's an FFG era sort of thing, but if it happened early on, then it was probably a lot more possible to do. But as a volunteer team that don't get paid for this and do this in our spare time, it wasn't really realistic. We did dabble with potentially some sort of middle ground, which I still think can happen in the future, such as like cards gaining the House Arryn affiliation. But that wasn't something that we could unfortunately do with the timeline that we had. So I do want to disclaim that we did definitely have a long conversation with the global operations team about this and considering making them a faction. But unfortunately, with the resources we have and with the amount of effort and work that it would require, it unfortunately just is not possible. As much as most of us want to do it.
Yes, I think it's the correct decision as well. I know a lot of the community actually would not like a ninth faction, mostly for the reasons that you have mentioned. So, but there is always the possibility. So a few years ago, we posted as an April Fool's joke on Facebook an announcement with House Arryn added to the game as a ninth faction, and we had some of those preview cards with the blue template that Flavio has created that looked really nice. So there is, of course, always the possibility of adding some of those cards in that color as prizes.
They've done well. The global operations team have done that with Banner of the Falcon already. I can't. It's been released on the AGOT cards page, I believe. I'm just trying to remember which circuit it's for. It's for one of them. It's part of the prize pack. It's a really nice blue version of the plot of the agenda, which is really cool.
Okay, so this is it for the neutral cards, and so I think all in all, most of the characters are really playable in some way in various decks. I have more reservations, I guess, for the non-characters here, but I think one thing that we can say, the design space, of course, for the House Arryn is not entirely exhausted. There are some cards, of course, that can still be introduced, and I think once this pack is in the meta and gets played a lot, and we see what works and what doesn't, I think the few remaining cards that still thematically belong to House Arryn could, of course, be designed to make some of these cards that maybe prove to be slightly underpowered. They could be made to work with this and make them slightly better in the future as well. So this is not the end, I guess, of House Arryn for the rest of the game.
Yeah, and that's generally the sort of thing that we want to do in all cases. You know, we release packs and then we look at how that pack, is circulated to the meta, and we will always react. If there's cards that aren't being played because there's not enough support, there's always the future to support them more. It might not be in the immediate next pack, but eventually, that theme, that trait, whatever it is, we do look at it. We do see we do watch statistics, we do see what's played, what isn't played, what's good, what's bad, and design around that. So if some of these cards aren't played, you can probably expect at some point more support for it.
Okay, shall we have a look at the in-faction cards now?
Yes, let's get to the pretty colors.
Okay, so starting with Baratheon, my favorite faction, although not necessarily my favorite cards in this one. So we have Jon Arryn, who is a small lord character that has 2 keywords, but he cannot be saved, so you cannot just play 3 copies and dupe him and have him in play with that renown and insight. Has a real downside, which I've definitely tested and am able to appreciate, that he can be tricky to keep in play, but he has an interesting forced interrupt. When he is skilled, each player can potentially gain power, so if you are on 14, you can win the game with that. And there are some other cards, of course, in the game that are similar. There are reactions, for instance, Joffrey from the core set, or the 7-cost Caitlyn can do something like that in the plot phase if they survive, but Jon Arryn can do it as an interrupt, which is quite an interesting ability. One thing that I was looking at for him, so with 2 keywords, we know that fools are really popular recently, and cards like Eric in Greyjoy that just have the keywords that you can copy with Shagwell and the bestow stuff really useful. So I think this potentially could be that kind of card for Baratheon, although slightly unfortunate, I guess, that Gendry requires all of your deck to be non-loyal for him to work, and he's another card that works with fools really nicely because of their weapon attachments. So they don't go together, but still, yeah, Jon Arryn fits in lots of places, even though maybe not as a key character.
Yeah. So Jon Arryn, we wanted his design to really fit in a way. Firstly, we actually had a discussion of whether Jon Arryn should be a Baratheon card or a neutral card, and it was voted that he makes more sense in Baratheon, as he, as we can probably all agree, contributed quite a lot to Robert's reign. We wanted to make sure that he was a character that fit the Arryn themes, but also wasn't going to be a key character. He's a supporting character to a deck, and I think we did achieve that. One of the other things we wanted to make sure that we hit was Jon Arryn's death pretty much kickstarts the Game of Thrones. Right, the series starts with his death, really, and so we wanted an effect that once Jon Arryn dies, stuff happens. And we did experiment with one that it's like after he dies, it adds another challenges phase to the game or to the round. But that was a bit too complicated, I would say, for what it was actually doing. And so instead, we settled for something here where he has Insight Renown, so it's going to benefit you no matter what. And then him being killed, everyone benefits in some way, which is sort of what happened in the Game of Thrones, where the power sort of started to fluctuate because he was keeping things together quite well. Also, notably, I mentioned earlier with Winged Knight, he also has a similar thing with Lysa Arryn, where he can be killed, but Winged Knight can remove him from the game rather than actually putting him in the dead pile, but his effect will still resolve.
Yes, that's actually quite interesting. I was just thinking whether I should include him in some of the decks now. There is, of course, in Baratheon Stormwind Fiefdom, you can get the power of him onto a faction card, so if you do lose him, yeah, definitely playable in a lot of decks.
Or Shira Errol, I think her name is, the 2-cost lady that can do power.
Can intercept the power as well, yes. Alright, and then we have Prince of the Narrow Sea. So this one, I've complained about a lot. So it's not my favorite design. So I spent a lot of time convincing some people that how attachment abilities are basically meant to work. So they're supposed to interact in some way with attached character, and this one does kind of, but only if it's Salador Sun. If it's anyone else, it's more a location ability basically. That is an interesting ability to be fair. So it has the Arryn triggering condition after you lose initiative, which is kind of weird in Smugglers, and it's questionable whether you want to lose initiative in that particular deck. But the ability itself actually does a lot of things. So first of all, Salador Sun and the Smugglers that can stand him a little bit. There is some Voltron potential there to have him participate in more than one challenge with the renowned keyword. The Commander trait, of course, enables Trident, which doesn't work in Smugglers, but who knows if they get an army that they can play also maybe. And then the reaction does two things as well. First of all, the cost to return someone to hand can be a benefit. Of course, if it's played against the reset, you get to keep an extra character, and you do tend to lose initiative. So if the text was reversed, if it said after you win initiative, it would work with plots like Wildfire Assault and not with plots like Valar Morghulis if you reveal them. But this way it's the opposite, so you can play an aggressive Morghulis knowing that you will get to keep a character. And the effect, you can kneel a character and the location if the cost works out for you. So if you return a 5-coster, which is quite possible, you can get something big. So most of the time locations you can get some economy at least, and some decent character which is quite a bit of control. We have a similar ability on the Smuggler that was released quite a long time ago, Coranis Atmantes, not sure how to pronounce him, that always has had an effective ability that was really impactful in the challenges phase, but awkward conditions with that, having to kneel himself in a warship. But the effect is definitely strong if you can take advantage of it, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what you said with the return cost being more beneficial in quite a few scenarios, I think that's something that really has to be taken into account here. I also know that we had this didn't really change during development. We did have a very last minute change, primarily for the card text space, which is something that gets very underlooked outside of design. We really have to take into account how well a card's text actually fits onto the card itself. And so we only noticed this once. Fabio from the art team had generated these card images. It had -1 initiative in there, but we decided to get rid of that and add that you could also return a captain or smuggler. Previously, it was just smuggler. I do like that addition. Now it has a very subtle interaction with something like Dale Seaworth, for example, where you could now reuse Dale Seaworth each turn to keep returning a Baratheon location to your hand, which I noticed after the fact. So that's interesting. But I think that he is providing a little bit more support to smugglers. I don't think this attachment alone is enough, but I'm excited to continue seeing more smuggler support in general.
Yeah, as I said, I don't really entirely like this card, but I do admit that it does a lot, and it's very versatile, so I think it will be used in some way. But yeah, the smugglers maybe are another card or two short of being a really good deck. And then we move on to Greyjoy, so thankfully a lot less text on this one. The Reader Septon has a very simple ability, just switches the top card with the bottom card of any player's deck as an action. And actually it could be a useful card for Greyjoy in the sense that it's a 2-cost chart that has 2 icons. This is not very common in Greyjoy, especially with the Intrigue icon, but as the downside, the traits that they're usually looking for, so Ironborn and Raider in some decks, Drowned God in others, this one does not have. But I think actually credit to the White Book podcast, they brought up something that I didn't previously consider. So Greyjoy with their big guys deck that can be hurt by Valar Dohaeris if they keep one of their 6 or 7 costers and this guy in play. Of course, they get to choose which card is on the bottom, and then you can just do the action and it's back in hand, which is really strong.
Yeah. I know that when we first put in this card, we did keep that in mind. But realistically, if you're slotting this card in that deck, then you're not putting other cards, other staples from that deck in the deck itself. So I do like that interaction. I'd also like to point out it's the first of the 7 card, I believe, in Greyjoy, unless if I'm incorrect there. I think it is.
Possibly. Is that going to matter? Can they do something with this?
I don't know. Maybe there's a Baratheon, a Greyjoy, the 7 deck somewhere. Oh no, there's Baelor Blacktide as well. There you go. But yeah, I just thought that was interesting. No, I'm really happy that it's turned out, and I believe this is the AI artwork that you were talking about earlier.
Yes, it's ridiculously nice.
Turned out really well. Yeah, it's honestly incredible how well that turned out.
Yeah, anything with this sunset type of thing and the weird not sure what that card is. I think it's Winter. Let me just check. Winterfell Crypt from one of the early. Yeah, that has this lantern. These look really nice to me always, and anything that has fire in the art always looks kind of weird to me. So these are. This is one of the really the most beautiful ones that we have, I think, in this. Almost looks like a unique character. Looks very prominent.
Almost.
Yeah. Okay, and then a bit more text on this one, and this is another one that had to be shortened at the last minute. Torrhen Square is a location that works with some shadow stuff. So if you can find shadows in Greyjoy and bring them out, you can get double pillage with your raider characters, and this is potentially good in a mill deck, or if you use corpse like with that, and for the annoying double triggers of stuff like Euron and Asha. And this one also, I tested this one personally quite a lot, went through a lot of changes, was non-loyal previously and just had a passive ability that discarded immediately after cards came out of Shadows, and yeah, was really successful in the decks I played, and now more tied to the challenges, which I think is a lot more fair, so you need to still work for it and win the challenges after you do this.
Yeah, the intent of this card had never really changed, being shadows, relating to shadows, and also discarding from the opponent's deck. But you're right, it went through a lot of iterations. I know there were multiple times where I think it was you and other people testing it had milled people multiple times, and it wasn't very difficult to do so. And so, yeah, this one here, I was personally slightly worried that it could be problematic because looking at cards like, what's the Greyjoy location that discards 3 cards for pillage? Its name is
Scouting Vessel.
That's it, Scouting Vessel. Scouting Vessel was problematic with things like Asher and Core Euron. This working in a similar way has me slightly worried, but at the same time, it's got a very clear difference in which you need to dedicate a bit of shadows. And one thing that I did want to bring up with this card that I thought would be useful is we wanted to make sure that Greyjoy. We want to make sure there's a very clear theme with Greyjoy taking locations, like thematically in the Song of Ice and Fire universe. So things like Torrhen Square and Moat Cailin. We wanted to make sure that Greyjoy are nice and their initiative is high and quick when they're relying on their warships, so in their zone essentially on the sea. But once they start taking land, they lower that initiative that they have for more nuanced effects. And we see that with Torrhen Square, and we see that sort of being supported with Moat Cailin by lowering all your opponent's initiative. So, if you can get to a point where everyone's initiative is 0, which is, luckily the theme of House Arryn as well, then the benefit of, or the downside of Torrhen Square isn't really seen, but you're still able to win initiative. So we do want to see more support with contested cards in Greyjoy working with a lower initiative, because we think that makes sense with the general idea of, warships being high initiative, taking, locations owned by other people, resulting in lower initiative but more nuanced abilities. And I think this supports that quite well.
Yeah, you know that I will disagree with this one. I absolutely hate the initiative on Greyjoy cards that hurts you. So they have that as one of their main themes, the plus initiative. So this kind of works against that. And if it lost that, actually there would be room for the other thing it had. So it was Shadow itself previously, and it allowed you to trigger it when it came out of Shadows. I guess not that many shadow cards to use. The Nighttime Marauders can be used. The black something raiders. What are those called?
Blackwater Raiders. Yeah.
Blackwater Raiders. And I guess Hagen's Daughter has shadow. But if you play Assault from the Shadows, which Greyjoy does not do, but might want to do with this card, of course, in the deck, it will always be possible to have something come out of Shadows.
Yep. So yeah, I do look forward to, in the future, when we do support more contested locations, actually making that lower initiative theme within Greyjoy work. So this is a good staple for that. So keep that in mind for future design.
And then we have the Halfman's Horde. This is a clansman character in Lannister. Also, something I dislike about this is that it has an ability that is quite similar to Gunther. It discards cards from the opponent's hand. If you have other unique attacking clansman characters, so there aren't that many of those available, but I think the reaction actually is just a bonus if you can get it. This I think is actually perfectly playable even outside of clansman decks, because it is a strong body with intimidate and assault, so even with no text whatsoever it would be good. And the army trait is a good one for Lannister. They are, I think, in a decent position to be able to play Trident with 2 commanders that they have and a bunch of armies. So yeah, this is could be considered, I guess, a good stuff card for Lannister. And also we had an episode of the Friendly Council recently with Clansmen, where Martin said that he would not include it in the particular deck that we built there, but he would like to do, of course, a Clansman deck that uses this and plays more on the board. And I think I actually saw him playing it online already. Nice addition. I think this will be appreciated.
Yeah. The intention here as well was obviously supporting Clansmen, but more specifically, we wanted more than just Tyrion as the centerpiece of a Clansman deck, because that's one of the downsides of that deck, is that, you know, if you find Tyrion, it's amazing, but if you don't find Tyrion, the deck is just behind until you find Tyrion. It can still do quite a bit, you know, without him, but he's very clearly the centerpiece of that deck to make it really work. And so we wanted another card that did that, and we wanted to also make sure there was a good reason to actually keep Halfman's Horde on the board, or more specifically, like, marshal them rather than, you know, the classic Clansman tactic of cheating things in and then returning them to hand. And I think this does achieve that with Intimidate. It's a very subtle way to do that, where if you do trigger any of the many return to hand abilities, which usually happens after you win a challenge with that character of some sort, if you return them to hand, you're not going to get that Intimidate. So I think this does achieve that in a good way. And you're right, this is just a good card in general. The reaction is just a bonus. Really, really keen to play this with Clansmen. I even saw a few people playing Prince That Was Promised with This Is Their Prince, which seems pretty decent, honestly, in a Clansman deck. So I'm excited.
Yeah, anything that you can stand with Intimidate is good, and even without Prince, easy enough to stand it, I think, with Painted Dogs, and even Stealth, not too difficult to get with Milk Snakes, I think, in this deck. So could be a really strong character that dominates the challenges phase if you use it correctly.
Yep.
And the other card, more flashy, less reliable, I think, but this actually is one of my favorites in this pack. The Warden of the West goes on Lannister Lords, which not that many to find, but there are some targets. Gives the commander trait and renown, so similar to what the Prince of the Narrow Sea is doing. And has a nice draw ability that works anytime a card is discarded from hand or deck if this guy is participating in a challenge, the attached character. And it's with limit once per round, it looks kind of inefficient to be drawing one card per round with attached character, as if it had insight basically. But there is some combo potential with this one that is really nice, so I've listed some abilities here already in the FAQ. Without his beard can get you 3 if you trigger it. There are some that can get you 2, 2 claim, Intrigue can get you 2, and Wardens of the West of course can get you 2. And if you do it with Pillage, Scouting Vessels can increase the number of cards, so if you use one Scouting Vessel you will get 3 cards. If you combine more than one you can get even more. And I think if you play Banner Kraken, there is also loot, which technically is unlimited. Okay, you're probably not getting 10 cards discarded from the opponent's deck, but who knows? And then you can just do the crazy draw. And yeah, the reserve on Hoto, okay, that's probably not going to happen. But theoretically, some Greyjoy choke decks do tend to get your reserve to something like 2 or 3, and then you discard a lot. Although the loyalty, I think, hurts you here. You would need to play Greyjoy as main faction in a reserve choke deck, I think. But this one I like because it's quite flashy, and you can try to get a big number in with a single draw that basically compensates for kind of a steady small draw that some other cards can get you from one round to another, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, we with this card, there's two main things that I think are important. One is we did want to support a concern with Lannister with draw, but at the same time, we needed to make sure that since core set, Lannister have intentionally draw has been one of their downsides, and we wanted to make sure that we were supporting it in a way that doesn't just give them a good draw card. Because I feel like once you do that, then it just turns into one faction being able to do everything well. And so this attempts to address that by reacting to a very specific time, as you said, hand discard being intrigue claim or other effects, or pillage from top of the deck. We feel that this does this in a very fair and simple way for a faction where that is meant to be a downside. If we were designing this card in, for example, Tyrell or Martell, for example, it would probably be a better draw. But that's just because that's what the faction should be doing. So we did have a few people mentioning, this is why can't Lannister get better draw? There shouldn't be. That's intentionally one of their downsides. But happy to support it in ways that are fair for that faction. The second part that I wanted to mention was we intend to release 3 more attachments in the future at some point that actually relate to this. So the Warden of the West, as we know, there is the plot called Wardens of the West, very similar name, which is the Lannister faction plot. We intend to release the other 3 as the Warden of the South, North, and East. And we want to make sure that they actually work with the plot. Warden of the West very clearly does, as you can trigger that plot to discard 2 cards and then trigger the reaction of this attachment to draw 2 cards. We keep an eye out for that in the future because, I'm excited to see those cards in a very similar format as well with, a passive and some sort of ability that interacts with the neighboring plot, so the related plot.
Okay, and then let's have a look at Martell. So we have Doran Martell. I think this is the 3rd version of him, isn't it? Or is it the 4th one already?
The 3rd one.
3rd one, okay. So, this is one of the most unique cards that we've seen recently. It reacts to losing dominance and checks 2 cards like Dorn does and places one in shadows, the other on the bottom. And he has a unique ability, so when he puts cards in shadows, he's not giving them that lasting effect of giving them a shadow keyword with the shadow token on them, like other cards that do that tend to do. Instead, he has passive text that gives every card you control in shadows shadow X, where X is their printed cost, so even if they do already have shadow, most of the time that will not work in your favor because the shadow cost is lower. Sometimes it's not though. For instance, with the 4 cost varies, it will be higher usually if there is no other stuff in shadows. And so it's interesting but kind of risky. So if he puts stuff in shadows and then he leaves play and those cards do not have the keyword themselves, they could potentially be stuck. But interesting for sure, pretty unique in what he does. So I have not tested him personally. I think some people think he's slightly underpowered, but I think there is potential here.
I've tested him a lot. I feel like it's been a bit of a mixed bag. People think that I've seen a lot of people saying that he's really good. The intention here, again, I'll come from a design perspective rather than just general opinion. The intention here, similar to Clansman, similar to the Halfman's Horde, with Clansman, was to provide another staple for the Martell Shadow pack, or Shadow deck, sorry. Shadow's Arryn Martell is a very staple card there, but other than that, there's not really another big card that really runs that deck and is the engine of that deck. There's Edric, forecast Edric Dane, who does complement the deck quite well, but I wouldn't necessarily call him an engine to the deck. We wanted to introduce Doran Martell to be one of those engines. So, finding Doran and or Ariane is a great big boost to that deck. And I think that the losing dominance is a very, very interesting mechanic to explore on, especially with its subtle ties to icon removal. So, if you are able to successfully, such as with Ariane Martell, the Shadows Ariane, if you're able to successfully blank an entire character's icons, all three icons, they will be standing for an opponent's dominance. So it's a subtle way to tie those two mechanics together and ensure that icon removal equals losing dominance equals reward. There's obviously two other losing dominance cards being Forecast Nymeria Sand, who isn't Shadows, and then Sir Archibald Yonwood, who is Shadows. It at least gives you a reason to play him in that Shadows deck. Doesn't make much sense of why he has Shadows, but he does. We were quite happy with how that turned out, and you're right. He's a bit of a risky card in the way that once he loses that, once he's out off the board, those cards are sort of stuck in Shadows. But we feel that's a really interesting mechanic with Martell Shadows. They've got a very niche way of chucking cards into Shadows without them getting a Shadow keyword and taking them out in unique ways. They can be put in there with Edric Dane, they can be taken out with Starfall Spy. The next card, which if you'd like to move on to, we can, actually does this exact thing as well.
Yes, a Traitorous Whisper, so this is a card that puts a shadow, reveals first of all a shadow card from each player and then puts it into play if it can. Optional actually, when you play this you can choose whether to put all of them into play or keep them in shadows. And actually this is interesting. So the first thing that you want to do with this is use it as economy, so potentially some cards will have shadow 5 or something like that, or even higher in shadows, and you can save as much as you would with or gain, let's say, a gold advantage as much as you would with Bounty of Highgarden, potentially even higher. But the other part, so having to put an opponent's card into play if they have it, and if of course it's eligible to be put into play, sounds like a downside in a way, but it's one of those misleading downsides, like the Hound, for instance.
Yes.
Where if you put the Robert Strong into play at a weird time when they're not going to be using him, it messes their plans. So this is not, they don't want you to control when their cards come into play. So this is really good, I think.
This card here, maybe second to with Doran being second, is probably one of my favorite designs of the pack. Purely because it has a lot of very subtle synergies that, to me, make some underused cards playable. So I did notice in testing as well that the passive of that card, being that you need a card with shadow in your discard pile, which does fit the Martell theme of discarding cards from your own shadows as cost, that does take into account. So realistically, you can't really use this early on because you sort of need those cards in your discard pile by that point. So you're right, it can be used as economy. I absolutely love how this can both be a benefit for shadows, but also a disruptor of shadows. And there's actually one Martell card which I really want to point out works super well with this, that is not played, and that is Friends at Court, where you can put Friends at Court into play before you play Traitor's Whisper. Check what cards, if your opponent has cards in shadows, of course, check what cards they have in shadows. If they have more than 2 cards, then you can see which one would be best to choose for Traitor's Whisper. So in your example there, if they had a Robert Strong, for example, you can see, oh, they've got a Robert Strong here. I might use him at the wrong time and put him into play now. But if they have 1 card in shadows, you can then use the second part of Friends at Court to move that card back to their hand, and that way you then play Traitor's Whisper, and it's only a benefit to you. where your opponent doesn't get a card into play. I feel like that interaction there was enough to just make this a really, really interesting event. And I love using Friends at Court now. Just as a good counter to shadows that also works in your favor. You know, if your opponent even has a single card in shadows, it's still good. You know.
Yeah, anything that brings unused cards into the game, I think, is always welcome.
Yeah, and it does also have that very subtle House Arryn theme of revealing cards in shadows. You know, if it does work with Sweet Robin in that way, where that revealed card would then be removed from the game if it meets his condition, of course. Which then, correct me if I'm wrong here, I believe that would, if you choose to put those cards into play, that card wouldn't go into play anymore because it's not, in the same spot.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. It's removed, so the effect that is trying to put it into play can no longer locate it, so you are safe from that card.
Yeah, so it's like that as well is a very niche interaction that I love to see.
Okay, and then we have Night's Watch. We have Craster's Keep Mutineer. This is a very simple ability. Just when it enters play, you can get rid of a duplicate from a character. None of the Night's Watch traits, unfortunately, but I think the first deck that I would consider, of course, is the Recruit deck that they play. So you get your characters into the discard pile, and then once unique characters leave play and the copy in the discard pile is still there, of course you can get it with certain Night's Watch effects. Or of course, if you just want a good reset, this guy also enables you to do that. So this one I think we'll see play.
Yeah. The design principle of this card was very straightforward. It was, we wanted the card to work with Mutiny at Craster's Keep. And this, if we look at that real quick, it primes a card to be discarded from play. If they've got a big, 7-cost character, put this in play, get rid of the dupe, and then Mutiny at Craster's Keep in the dominance phase, bam, that character's gone. So it was a very low bar of what we needed this card to do. But I also think that it will definitely find use outside of that. I feel like I've seen it played here and there in Night's Watch. Just it's a useful ability regardless. And outside of that, it's a 2-icon, 2-strength character. Good.
Yes, I think not a disaster if it can do anything, but usually conventional decks probably will not find room for a character that has no traits that Night's Watch works with. But if you are trying to do something specific, I think this guy can help you in a lot of ways. So definitely a good one. And the second one they have is Defensive Debris, which is an attachment with an interesting ability. It has Bestow, and you can use that gold in the challenges phase to choose basically something in the discard pile like Nighttime Marauders would, and then cards with that cost cannot be played or put into play. So cannot be put into play is pretty strong because some abilities only work with played or marshaled, like Triss Botley for instance, and put into play prevents a lot more things and can keep you safe from a lot of effects, I think, in the challenges phase, the events particularly. And if you are playing the 6-cost wall, of course you can look at the discard pile and see what chart, for instance, they have available, and you can stop that being put into play, so they have to give you the big one instead. So this one, I guess, similarly to the Mutineer, I think the Recruit decks will benefit the most from this one.
Yeah, I feel like this is a card that, and we noticed this in design, its range of use is a lot broader than people may initially think. A good example there that you just said was the wall, preventing, if you've got 2 choices, preventing the wrong choice from coming into play. This is also one of the in-faction cards that rewards that hand knowledge or hand/shadows knowledge. If you can utilize any of those other cards that can look at or reveal your opponent's information, you can use this card to then block any events or any characters that could enter play via ambush or shadows. the hardest part is probably getting cards into this discard pile, but we already know that the right Night's Watch deck can already do that quite well.
Yes, exactly. And then we have 3 factions left. We have Crannogmen for Stark, so hopefully Stark is having a better pack here than it had with Bran the Builder. Let's see, we have a Shadows character with two icons and quite efficient strength that has claim replacement. So in an intrigue challenge you can kill something with cost 3 or lower instead of the normal claim, which sounds like maybe not that important, but I have recently played against it, and of course Delena Florent, important character, immediately killed, which is a sad day for me. So similar feelings to when Venomous Blade gets her. It is annoying, can win you games if you kill the right things, and I think the main thing, of course, with this guy is if he cannot kill anything important, it's not a big deal. He's 4 for 4 with 2 icons, so whatever. You just let normal claim happen, and you are fine, I think.
Yeah, with this card here, we wanted a some sort of kill effect. But also we wanted to make sure that, one, it was sticking to the bit of a House Reed theme that we're seeing, at least for House Reed shadow cards, where they're returning to shadows. But it also makes sense for Crannogmen that their kill effect then hides them from play, because thematically they're a bit of an elusive group at the moment, really messing with Greyjoy, who are in the north at the moment. So I'm really happy with how it turned out. This was one of the ones that went through quite a few iterations and discussions on trying to get it right, and more specifically trying to get an ability that felt good, that did something useful, and also was not the size of an entire PDF document on its own. So the result of this is really good. Some people might think, oh, it's reacting to intrigue. It doesn't feel very stark, but I think realistically, it is very stark. It's turning intrigue into a kill effect and getting rid of the intrigue claim. That's pretty much exactly what you want. You do a military challenge with high claim, and then you do this as well. It's got a lot of board clear potential. And I also hope that it encourages more of a Battle of the Trident deck. I know that it's actually a very efficient character for the realm to just marshal into play with 4 gold. And then, their ability works by returning them to shadows, so you're not wasting the shadow cost, really. I'm really excited to see how this affects the game.
Yes, so the previous version, I remember, it was a really complicated text that put, I think, some kind of token on cards when House Reed characters came into play from shadows or something like that, and worked with Mira and Greywater Watch, and it was really complicated, kind of like a lingering venom type of kill effect that was quite tricky, and there was some mixed opinions, I guess you could say, whether it's really strong or not worth it. So I think this is much simpler, much more straightforward, and a good decision to go in this direction in the end. And definitely I think Stark is winning with the other card they have here, the Wolf's Den. Seems to be quite popular. So this one works with the Stark mechanic. When something is sacrificed or killed, usually it says when a Stark character, but this one doesn't say it, so if you have non-Stark characters, it will work with those as well. And you can place something on the bottom of your the bottom card of your deck into shadows. So basically works kind of as draw in that respect. And of course you can do it blind, or you can get stuff on the bottom that you want there. So the immediate combo that everyone has mentioned is with Willa Manderly. And works even in the same reaction window, I guess, because she reacts to the same thing. You can just put something on the bottom and you have it in shadows. And even getting the same card there over and over again is possible. I think someone mentioned the Tali save event that can just keep something from getting killed ever. How does the timing work with Ramsey for this? Could you do Ramsey a bunch of times?
That's a good question. I feel like because Wyler Manderley specifically says choose another card, I don't know about that.
Yeah, so you would need two
If you,
Ramses basically, and you could loop them
yeah,
with Wolves then.
you
So
could potentially,
it's yeah, it's
potentially
costly maybe.
inexpensive.
It's
Yeah,
difficult, but if you did do it, it would be super annoying to play against Ramses.
yeah.
Fast reaction can't really stop him unless you have Bagging Brothers. So yeah. So Wolves then I really like and excited to
Hmm.
play it. We are playing this in our Stark deck for the World Cup as well. So looking forward to how this turns out.
Yeah, we've got this in ours as well. It's just a one-off. It's not a staple of the deck, but it's going to be useful. I feel like this does breathe a bit of life into Stark Shadows, and I guess Cranagman will as well. But this, I'm a big fan of this card. This one didn't really change from its first implementation. I think the only thing was the cost was raised from 2 to 3, and it became loyal. But the ability itself stayed because it was just so much fun, and I think I agree. I like it a lot.
Yeah, it made it quite annoying to when attacking into them, basically kill off their character, but they're getting some advantage with that, and yeah, it was strong in games. So I haven't played with it because obviously I don't play Stark a lot, but felt strong playing against it, and yeah, should be interesting to see. Okay, and then let's take special care with this one. We have Lison Mar, who is our champ card in this pack, designed by the 2017 European Joust champion Reinhard Shevchik. So this is the first of two cards actually that he has. And the other one not designed yet, as far as I know, but he did win the World Championship in that same year. And this is a really interesting card. Text actually is quite simple compared to some of the options that we were considering, because he does something really unique and requires some understanding, I guess. Let me read it quickly. So during the first challenge you initiate each phase, defenders are declared before you declare attackers. Then it says, as a clarification, attackers and defenders are knelt simultaneously as part of initiating the challenge. So basically, the first challenge with him in play, when you attack, you have to do a legal attack like you would in normal circumstances. You have to pick an opponent and a challenge type that you can initiate, so you have to have a standing character with that icon. And then that's it for you. You wait until the opponent chooses first. They choose what they will defend with, and then you choose your attackers, and then the challenge is initiated, everything simultaneously. So I know that people were not high on Lisono in testing, but playing against him and that ability that really made the first challenge awkward for you was super annoying. And now that I'm playing Targaryen in the World Cup, basically for the first time, seriously looking at that faction, because it's not my favorite, as I'm sure you know. I have used Lisono, and it's really fun. It's a challenge that, yeah, you can either just avoid wasting a bunch of resources if it's over defended, or it's a free. Usually the opponent will let it go because they can't be sure what will happen if they declare a bunch of characters, and you can still beat them in strength. And yeah, you can just get some benefit really cheaply, it feels, most of the time with him. Just before you comment on him, let me clarify. So there were some questions here in the FAQ. So there is no additional step of declaring defenders. That step doesn't happen. It's just moved to the beginning of the challenge. There is an action window, and then technically there is another action window. So you need to double pass the action window for the challenge to get resolved. So really simple. Everything with him happens just in the initiation, and then the challenge proceeds as normal.
Yeah, like Sono, we wanted to ensure that we were keeping the design that Reinhardt wanted from day one. And I'd like to thank him for. It's a really nice design, but it also gave us a lot of headaches to ensure that it was, made sense with the rules. And I think we got to a good point in the end. I know your FAQ outlines a lot of our discussion, but put it this way, that summarized FAQ, even though we're missing 1 or 2 points maybe, that was summarized from about 3 solid weeks of discussion just on this card alone. And that's not like discussion spread over 3 weeks. It's probably about 3 weeks of actual talking at this point. As a card itself, I'm really happy with how he turned out. He was initially 6 cost, but brought him down to 5. I feel like Targaryen don't have enough good 5-costers. I feel like he should fit that cost. And honestly, he's an efficient 5-coster. Worst case scenario, even if he's not affecting your opponent's game, which he should be, even if he isn't, he's a 5-cost 4-strength insight. That's good, especially in Targaryen.
Yeah, so he didn't change a lot, as you say, during the design. I think the very first proposal had him work in every challenge, which was a bit much. But then that
Yes.
discussion was not solely about wording. Of course, it was the mechanics as well. So the question was if you can do a fake challenge, basically. So if you can have defenders be chosen, and then you say, okay, you're defending this, so I'm just not going to attack, and declare no attackers. And we basically decided that this was not the way to go. So you can't really cheat the game in any way with him, but still, pretty good.
And to point out, it wasn't just us deciding that as well. I think we got to that decision fairly logically by just understanding the rules, and more specifically understanding the granular parts of initiating a challenge, where you need to select the challenge type, then you need to select the opponent, then you need to select, in a usual challenge, the attackers, and then it all resolves simultaneously of all those 3 things initiating the challenge. I guess also you got to select stealth and assault targets. And so we had made sure that the selection of defenders was slotted somewhere in between there to make sense. So even though it's all happening simultaneously, as it says in the rules, we identified that the choosing of each of those elements of the challenge type, the opponent, the attackers, the stealth, the assault, the choosing of those does happen in an order. Because, for example, you shouldn't be able to you shouldn't be able to do a challenge against someone you support. And so choosing attackers before you choose the challenge type makes no sense. I guess also, they didn't have the icon. So we identified that the order of choosing actually does matter. And so with that, we could then say, okay, choosing defenders can happen here, but it resolves, as it says in the clarification text, they are knelt simultaneously as part of initiating the challenge.
Yes, I think this is pretty straightforward, actually, if you think about it. So if you read the rules really extensively, and it sounds complicated there, but everyone knows that, of course, you pick the opponent, you pick the challenge type, you then choose the attackers. You say, I'm attacking with these guys, and I will use stealth on whatever. And it is in order, but it is all simultaneous as far as the game is concerned. So basically, this works the same with Lysona.
Yeah, I think the word to use here is they resolve simultaneously, but they're chosen in order.
Yeah, so there is still the question what happens in melee if a challenge where this procedure basically with choosing defenders first happens, and then it's redirected, and we need to add that. So this is not entirely clear from the rules, but we have discussed that already, and we'll add that at some point for Lysona. And the other card that Targaryen has here is the Balerion, which is a warship location, gives some benefit to Captain Groleo, and then you can use it to give someone assault and plus strength. So if you are going to use assault, you need to do that before the challenge is initiated, otherwise assault will not help you target a location. And this one could be alright, so you have some leeway here when to use it. I guess it leaves play when you do, so you have one use basically, and you can choose a challenge where it will help you either with plus strength or where assault will matter. On the other hand, I think this might be slightly on the weak side, so you're not really going to do some Voltron Grole or something with his stealth and power icon. That's seems a bit crazy for a two-coster. And if it goes unused, it basically has done nothing. There is no other benefit for you, so you need to find a way to make use of its ability in some way, I guess. Otherwise, you've wasted the card, I think.
Yeah. This card, from a design perspective, we had one goal, and it was to make this thematically fit what the Balerion was for. So, for those who don't know, this I might be getting the locations incorrect, but this is a ship, one of the three main ships owned by Grolio, and it was eventually dismantled to be used as siege weaponry. I think it was to capture Marine, but I could be wrong there. And so we wanted to really make it so, whilst it's a warship, it's benefiting Captain Grolio as a warship, but then it can be used as a way to attack locations. But doing that would get rid of the card. So initially we had a really interesting, but it was a mechanical nightmare of being a location that then attached to a character as an attachment, and it would give them assault during power challenges or something. We ended up scrapping it for something simple, which I think the part that I do like about this is the very subtle part of shuffling your deck. I feel like with stuff like Marinese Market, shuffling a card into your deck as a cost is surprisingly useful because it reinvigorates your deck. So the cards at the bottom are now no longer at the bottom, could be at the top. So I like how this turned out. The passive with Captain Grolio, we are aware it's not really useful, but that's not really the intention of the card. It's just there for mostly thematic reasons. And you can probably expect in the future to see 2 more warships related around Captain Grolio and doing a similar thing because they all be used as siege weapons.
Yeah, looking forward to that. Also, of course, Targaryen is one of the 2 factions that missed out on a big 8-cost army with assault, so I guess if anyone needs a bit of extra assault, it's Targaryen.
Yep, that we also took that into account, yeah.
And then we have Sir Robert Royce for Tyrell. So he has a very simple ability. He has an efficient cost to strength ratio, 3 for 5, and the only thing with him is he cannot be declared as an attacker or defender in the first challenge each player initiates each round. So basically, if you go first, you cannot use him in the first one. If you go second, he cannot defend the first one. Yeah, which is pretty straightforward, and I know that we were looking for him for the World Cup in a deck, the Tyrell deck, because the other one, even though it's popular, if you're not playing enough summer plot cards, it's not doing much. So this as an alternative it could be good. Personally, I think he's on the weak side. I've always thought that throughout the play testing, but I know that some people think he is decent enough, and he is pretty straightforward. So not much to say on him.
Yeah, I think the intention with Robar wasn't to have a very strong and stable card. It was just to have a good chud to support, I guess, Rainbow Guards in general, rather than, we've had a bit of problematic King's Guards decks recently and Knights decks. And so here he has a very clear synergy with, the name is skipping me, the one that gains an intrigue icon for every knight with every king, Rainbow Guard with a gold.
Gaiard, Morrigan.
I think that's him, yeah. It has very clear synergy with the Guard Morrigan, and when you take that into account, if you synergize it with the other Rainbow Guard, he then becomes a Tricon with 5 strength for 3 gold, and that feels more useful. Thematically, we were trying to ensure that he stuck to his idea of he was very hesitant to. I believe he was guarding Renly's tent, and he was very hesitant with actually reacting to what happened there. And so we wanted to use that hesitation as a mechanic here to show, he can't be used in the first challenge. But to counter that, he's also a strong 3 for 5 Bicon, which cannot be ignored here. Interestingly enough as well, he would be quite an interesting character to actually blank yourself. we did note that as well. So any sort of blank effects, there's a lot of abilities, but like there's also the 5-for-1. I think it's a siege plot.
Fortified position.
Fortified position. That's the one. You can actually utilize that to your advantage. I think he's a decent card. I don't think he's super strong, but I also don't think he's as weak as some people might think he is. Yeah.
All right, and the last one we have, a Wall of Roses, is a Shadows event for Tyrell that has removal from challenges. So you reveal your hand, which is, to be fair, is not one of those entirely fake costs, but there is a benefit potentially for Tyrell revealing their cards in a la Tyrell, and sometimes if they play other cards that reveal their hand, once you reveal it the first time, of course, it's no longer a real cost since the knowledge is there for everyone. And the effect is removing characters from a challenge. Now it will cost you 3 gold in total. You cannot play it because it has no printed cost to just normally play as an event. However, the effect is interesting. So if you do have it in Shadows, and if you can imagine a tight late game situation where the opponent needs to push a challenge against you, removing 2 attackers, 2 of their strongest attackers usually, that seems very difficult to push anything past you in that case. So I think this basically wins one on defense anytime you want if you have it.
Yeah, this card we wanted to, we slowly want to support more stand and remove effects in Tyrell, and although some people wanted this to be an all-in-one encompassing, event that fixes that entire theme, I think it's safer to incrementally introduce cards that work here. Obviously, it's also working with reveal from hand, but I think that this card here, it turned out all right in testing. It's not one of the strongest cards in the pack, but it is also one of those cards that it's waiting for a future deck to utilize it. And once that deck is put together and refined, this is definitely going to be a staple card in that deck. And again, similar to what I've said in the past, earlier in this recording, this is a card that we're going to watch for and see if we need to support it in the future. Honestly, I think that we will, and I really look forward to doing exactly that and supporting stand and remove decks in the future.
Yeah, so this went through a couple of versions. I think there was something that gained power in a weird way that the playtesters didn't really find efficient. So this does what it does very efficiently, at least. So yeah, pretty good in theory, and we'll see how it works out. So this is the last one we had, and this is as high as honor for you. So I forgot to show you, of course, the release article. Just a second. Okay, so we have the release article for you here. I will put a link, of course, in the description of this video. You can read the text. It's a bit of theme flavor for you and some explanation about card mechanics that I guess you don't need now if you watched the video. And of course, as usual, you can find instructions on this page how to order these cards, have them printed for you. Of course, there's links to the images. So yeah, this is what we had. So I guess we can do like we did for the previous specs. We can pick our favorites and maybe also let's have a prediction, 1 card each, about the card that is going to be problematic, if there is one. So if you want to take a few minutes, you can, and obviously I'll cut the thinking part out.
Yeah, right. I'm probably gonna say. I know. I'm pretty sure you're gonna say like Mord or something, aren't you?
Not sure. So I can start if you like. So
yeah, you start.
This time I'm not going to choose Baratheon. So not that I think they're bad, but the decks that I play will not have much use for these cards like they had for Storm's End and Summerhold, that were my 2 favorite cards from the previous 2 packs. I do like Oh, it's a tough call because I did enjoy Lisona in testing, but I do like that weird combo draw that Warden of the West has. So you know that one of my absolute favorite cards, or two of my favorite cards, in fact, are Blackwater Bay and Silisi. So on big boards, she needs 8 characters, then you draw 8 at the start of challenges,
Yeah.
which is crazy and has that kind of vibe. If you can pull
Yeah.
it off, I've done it in testing. I've drawn 5, so it feels good, and I think I will give this a try in my Lannister decks. It's going to be one of those, I'm afraid, that maybe people that really want to play efficient decks and are great deck builders will just give it a miss, but I do like the potential that it has, so I would say this for my favorite in this pack.
Do we also want to say one of our favorite neutrals? Since this is a House Arryn pack, it might be good to choose one of those additionally.
Okay, now I think this one I will have more problems with because they don't really. I do like my characters to be in faction usually. I just have one or two that are neutrals, but yes, I think I'm looking at Maester Coleman. I've used him successfully. I think he's kind of a good stuff card that great in Conclave, obviously, but even outside of that, putting a copy of him in and being able to do a nice swing in dominance with his ability is alright. And also, any deck I think that has some Maesters. So Maester Aemon and Maester Malin are 2 Maesters in Night's Watch that are playable. And in Greyjoy there's Kerwin and Maester Morenmore, and you can put Vendamir as well. So to bring those decks into the actual viable chance of playing Outwit can be really strong. So I think I would go for Coleman here as my favorite neutral.
Nice. I think for in factions, I sort of spoiled it a little bit earlier. I think it has to be in a Trader's Whisper for me. I just love the amount of interactions that it encourages. I love how it's working with the Martell Shadows theme of discard pile, and working with revealing, and working with their theme of cheating cards into play from shadows. Like it's hitting all of the right buttons here. It feels well costed. Obviously you can get some really crazy scenarios with like assault from shadows by cheating. Hell, I think the best scenario would be like cheating a Lord Anders host that's been placed into shadows with a 2-cost event. That to me is just very exciting. But also just the subtle interactions it has with like friends at court, and we've already discussed it all. I love it. With an honorable mention for Doran Martell. So unlike the last pack, I definitely am going with the Martell cards in this pack. Big fan of those. And if I'm to look at neutrals, I actually think it's going to be Sweet Robin. There's a few contenders here, but I think Sweet Robin takes the cake for me. From his cost to his cost to strength to icon ratio, to the keywords that he has, to the interrupt, even to the artwork. I kind of like the artwork. What one of our recurring commissioned artists, Anbui, did. I love it. I think that's, and all the subtle interactions that it provides. I do agree that it's probably going to be a judge's worst nightmare in a physical tournament. But other than that, yeah, I think it takes cake for me.
Okay, so we can just continue from here because the problematic cards that I wanted to point out, if there was one that I think could be problematic, I think Sweet Robin is a good candidate. So everyone keeps thinking that he's just going to remove everything, and it doesn't work out because of the initiative value restriction and the limit. But at some point there's going to be decks that trigger in multiple phases and they keep removing all of your answers, and that could be annoying. So that's one of the candidates. But since he's your favorite card, I could go with the other one. We talked about him before. So the stand on Benjicot does not work as a combo, but someday, I think, someday at some point, like we had with the Summer Hall that was causing no issues, but then suddenly the Silver Steed deck that wins with the infinite power challenges is yeah, I would say viable. I did win 3 of the 4 games in the friendly open event. So I think at some point someone will do mill combo with him, and yeah, won't be appreciated by the community at that time, I think.
Yeah. In regards to problematic combos for me, or for problematic cards, even though I said it was my favorite, I do have to agree with Sweet Robin in a way. but looking at other cards, I want to say Lysa's Letter, but the fact that it's an event is the only reason why it's kept in check for me. So I probably wouldn't actually choose Lysa's Letter. In fact, I'd probably just choose Cranigman. I feel like, even though it has been brought down, I feel like being able to repeat that in multiple ways it's not necessarily going to break anything, but I feel like it'll start to get a bit too efficient when you combine that with Claim Raise. I'm finding it hard to see problematic cards outside of Sweet Robin. And I guess Benjicott is fair as well. I can definitely see very strong cards, though, in certain decks. So I guess that's my answer there. It's a bit of a loose answer.
I will see if we get it right this time. So last time we were not that successful with our predictions.
Yep.
Okay, so speaking of next, let's see what we have for the future. So this pack has taken a long time. I think
Yes.
not as high as Honor. Bran the Builder was released at the end of April, wasn't it, or something like that, beginning of May. So it's the better part of a year, I guess, to get the next one out. It is slightly bigger, so but it still was quite an achievement to finally push it through, and a lot of work involved.
Yeah.
And there is already, of course, a plan for the next expansion. And Stephen, I'll let you introduce that one.
Yes, so the next one, we've just started with the playtesting phase of this next pack. It's going to be the final support, or final primary support for everything warlike. That's armies, commanders, assault. Not to say that you would be halting support for those cards further on. It's just the primary support. It's also going to have a trickle of anti-army tech, which I'm personally looking quite forward to. Reasons to get rid of great ranging is always great. And with also a trickle of anti-shadows for in-faction cards. So keep an eye out on that. It's I can probably say the name. It's going to be called the Spoils of War. At least that's the current working name. And very soon you will see playtesting for this. All are welcome, as per usual, to playtest this pack. You'll keep an eye on the usual Discord channels for all that. I know that outside of the actual design and playtesting Discord, which I manage, we push these notifications to the Friendly Open channel, and I have plans to also push it to the Global Operations Team channel and other channels. So keep an eye out there. We always welcome open playtesting for both playtesting tournaments and just regular playtesting. And you should be able to see those cards soon on the Iron Throne, I think in the next few days. I'm just waiting for that to be pushed through. And yeah, I don't think it's going to take... I'm probably going to regret saying this, but I don't think it's going to take as long as High as Honor did, and that's primarily because it's a 30-card pack rather than 40. And as High as Honor realistically took a long time because balancing neutral cards is a lot more difficult and a lot more time-consuming than balancing in faction, simply for the fact that you need to account for every single faction that the neutral card can be used in, rather than just the faction itself. So we should see that pack be developed in less time.
Yes, and I think as High as Honor obviously was introducing some new mechanics as well. And the next one should be supporting more of what we've been used to. So you can expect that very soon as number 25 here on ThronesDB. You can have a preliminary look at that, and hopefully it will be a success. So the game at the moment, I think, in a pretty good state. Balance-wise, there were some restricted lists, obviously, restricted lists that were quite heavy with their choices, and but I think the result is pretty healthy game, and we'll see. Unfortunately, the timing. This pack was released quite a bit before the World Cup actually started, but the time to really figure out the decks and the cards wasn't there. So I think the decks are slightly low on the new cards. But in future events, in the coming months, of course, we will see how this pack plays out in actual games. So should be really exciting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Alright, so that's all we have for you today. I would like to thank Steven again for doing this video with me. The third time we've gone over 3 hours again, I think, even after we edit some of it out. So thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
That's all good. I expect this to go on for quite some time with 40 cards to get through and a lot of discussion.
Okay, and hopefully we can continue this tradition with the Spoils of War as well.
I was going to say a special thank you to you for all of your hard work as well. I know a lot of the ruling and the wording of things just wouldn't be to the quality that it is without you. So I really appreciate your help as well, and also having me, of course. But, you say that I'm helping the game quite a bit. Well, so are you. So don't forget that.
Absolutely my pleasure, and thanks for the compliment. Yeah, so thanks to all of you for joining us today. Hopefully we'll see you in the next one as well. Bye bye.